Chapter 14:17. The people around him suddenly felt their hair stand on end. They kept retreating, but there were still a few people who were a little slower. When they were touched by the gray powder of the corpses, their cheeks started to rot. His cheeks began to rot, and before long his bones were gone. Kill them. An elder made a prompt decision and shot out a few bolts of light, killing them directly. Their corpses were rotting at a speed visible to the naked eye. Everyone's faces were filled with shock. Don't be lucky in the forbidden area. The elder of Blazing Sky sect scolded. Everyone was on tenterhooks. They didn't care about the dead people and continued to move forward. In the face of death, they were all very careful. They tried to avoid some plants. However, no matter how careful they were, some people were still in trouble. They stepped on the hard-shelled insects, and their bodies started to rot quickly, just like the people before them. This kind of trend was something that even an elder with great ability would have difficulty dispelling. In fact, an elder of a sect had even died because of it. Lin Yu followed behind. The reincarnation aura here didn't affect him much. 9 stargrass. Lin Yu looked at the heaven and earth treasure. Without hesitation, he put it into his storage bag. The reincarnation aura was fatal to the cultivators in this world, but it was a rare nourishment for Lin Yu. Therefore, the aura of the herb couldn't hurt Lin Yu. After killing a few more insects, he put them into his storage bag. This was also the meaning behind the several main ingredients used to refine the breakthrough pill. Therefore, Lin Yu didn't let it go. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. At this moment, Lin Yu looked ahead and said slowly, "It's here." Just as Lin Yu finished speaking, a pangolin suddenly rushed out of the dense forest in front of them. It suddenly rushed out of the ground. No one had expected this. The strange beasts in front of them were instantly pierced. Under the pangolin's sharp mouth, the strange beasts were scared out of their wits and kept running away. However, they had been tamed and the seed of control was planted in the depths of their spiritual consciousness. Come back. Threads of divine sense appeared in the hands of the elders, summoning all of the wailing beasts back to them. This pangolin definitely had the strength of the 6th step. Moreover, the armor on it was shining with the light of runes. Perhaps even a 6th step expert couldn't break its defense. Everyone furrowed their brows and retreated uncontrollably. Some disciples already had the idea of retreating because they felt the terrifying pressure. This is not a place for humans. After being suppressed for a long time, some disciples' spirits almost collapsed. More than 50% of the people around them. Don't be afraid. Everyone, use the weapon. The elder of the celestial parting sect took a step forward, and a large umbrella appeared in his hand. It was overflowing with light and color, directly replacing the heaven and earth here. Under the red light's light was shining on the ground of the pangolin's light. As the elder of parting heaven's sect formed a hand seal, the pangolin was imprisoned. The foundation of the heaven departing sect is really unimaginable. I didn't expect that they would even bring out a magic weapon like the sky gauze umbrella. Some elders from other sects were shocked. However, how could they not have something to rely on when they came to the forbidden area? They all used the powerful weapons of their sects to kill the pangolin. The origin of these Dharma treasures was very ancient. They were all left behind by some powerful cultivators in the sect. They were all at least at the 7th step and already had a simple level of intelligence. At this moment, several weapons were suppressing the pangolin together. The Blazing Sky umbrella was mainly used to restrain the pangolin. Under the red light, the pangolin seemed to have fallen into a swamp and couldn't break free. Just like that, 2 hours passed. Everyone finally killed the pangolin with difficulty. Everyone let out a long sigh of relief. Clearly, killing such a creature had taken a huge toll on them. However, no one took the pangolin's body away. The creature in the forbidden area had been infected by the reincarnation chi and had a terrifying aura. Even if they brought it back to their sex, no one could refine it. Lin Yu took advantage of this. The pangolin was also one of the ingredients used to refine elixirs. It was especially so for a pangolin of this size. It had at least 1,000 years of cultivation, and its body was full of medicinal power. It was a rare ingredient for an alchemist. Lin Yu kept the pangolin's body. He looked at the people of the sects who had already left. Each of them had their own plans, and none of them were idle. At least when facing the pangolin, they wouldn't use any tricks unless someone died. In particular, some sects still had powerful tricks up their sleeves. None of this could escape Lin Yu's detection. However, Lin Yu was very happy to see these people fighting with each other. He could reap the benefits by sitting back and waiting. They were now deep in the forbidden area. Everyone looked in the same direction, and all of them revealed a look of shock. The reincarnation chi was so strong that it almost couldn't be dispersed. Could it be that this place is the cause of the beast stampede? An elder guessed at this moment. Only such a strong reincarnation chi could make people feel afraid. Even the strange beasts here were no exception. Do we need to get closer and investigate? Someone suggested at this moment. No need. Our purpose here is to find the remains of a strong. It's best not to provoke others. An elder of Blazing Sky sect said with a frown. I don't know what it is, but there's no doubt that it's horrifying. Otherwise, the strange beasts here wouldn't have escaped from the forbidden area. Someone continued. They didn't dare to go closer. Lin Yu stood at the back and looked at that place indifferently. This was the place where he had been sleeping for a long time. As he woke up, the true intent of reincarnation in his body exploded. This led to the things that happened later. I wonder where the two of them are now, Lin Yu said. He took a step forward and used the world's end near at hand. In an instant, he arrived at this place. Everything within a 1-mile radius was covered in a layer of gray. It was as if nothing could change. It had been like this since time immemorial. There were no time and space Tao laws here. There was only endless silence. The plants seemed to be frozen at the moment Lin Yu woke up. The two of them were no longer in this place. Lin Yu stood in the center. The reincarnation aura here entered his body. He absorbed all the remaining aura in the area. However, he didn't use the remaining true intent of reincarnation to break through his current realm. This was the power of his previous Tao fruit. Right now, he wanted to use the techniques here to break through to the highest realm. Then, he would merge his Tao fruit and reach the peak. This was extremely difficult for Lin Yu. However, he somehow ended up in this place. How could Lin Yu not gain anything? After Lin Yu absorbed the reincarnation aura here, the mighty power in his body disappeared in the blink of an eye. He returned to the appearance of an ordinary person. If the two of them aren't here, Lin Yu closed his eyes. The remaining reincarnation aura on his body turned into incense. He was using the power of the ancient characters to deduce the location of the two. Not long after, Lin Yu opened his eyes and looked into the depths of the forbidden area. I didn't expect the two of them to actually enter there, Lin Yu said slowly. They must have been coincidentally healed by Lin Yu when they entered this place. They must have possessed a bit of Lin Yu's aura. The reincarnation aura here couldn't affect them. That was why they could step into such a deep place. However, this was less troublesome for Lin Yu. That was also the destination of his trip. The ruins in front of them were already in sight. Lin Yu caught up with the others. After 2 months of trekking, they finally saw a basin in the distance. The basin wasn't formed naturally. It seemed that an unimaginable battle had taken place here. It caused the area within 100 miles to collapse. One must know that in the forbidden area, one's cultivation was suppressed everywhere. It was hard to imagine how powerful the people who had fought here back then were. As the group continued to get closer, they finally saw a skeleton in the center of the basin. It seemed to be some kind of powerful beast. Just the skull alone was comparable to a palace. Some kind of formation pattern was carved on the skull. Chapter 14:18. It should be here, the elder of the Parting Sky sect said slowly. His voice was filled with excitement. This place was once a relic left behind by a terrifying being that surpassed the entire Chu country. It happened 2,000 years ago. It had stayed in Chu country for a period of time before entering the forbidden grounds. They did not know the reason, but the few sects of Chu country had always been in awe of this place. If it were not for the help of the Western powers of Chu country during the Beast Tide a few years ago, the entire Chu country would have been turned into a slaughterhouse. Lin Yu was behind the crowd. Looking at the relic, he frowned slightly. He could feel a familiar yet inexplicable aura here. His unchanging state of mind was actually fluctuating at this moment. He was afraid of seeing the outcome in his heart. Even after 2,000 years, the soaring sword intent was still difficult to erase. Everyone was in awe. At this moment, they were heading towards the depths of the relic. The crowd stepped over the skull. They could see that the skull was not complete. On the top of the skull, there was a broken sword. However, it was still rotten, and there was not a single drop of divine power seeping out. The crowd could not help but feel pity. This sword has probably surpassed the seventh step. An elder sighed, because even though the divinity of the broken sword had already dissipated, they could still feel the sharp sword intent on it. It was as if it could cut down the sun, moon, and stars. No one wanted to take the broken sword down. Then, everyone stepped into the skull. The elders of the Parting Sky sect and the people of the other sects all took out the items they had brought out from their sections. The origin of these items was very mysterious. They had once entered a relic and spent a lot of manpower and resources to bring it out with great difficulty. The tokens in their hands were also left behind by this expert 2,000 years ago. This expert had once lived in Chu country for a period of time. Before entering the Forbidden Grounds, he had left behind a relic. There were 6 tokens in it. These were the credentials to enter this place. Lin Yu had unknowingly blended into the crowd. Then, a fog appeared in the area. When the crowd opened their eyes again, they had already arrived at the relic. Everywhere they looked, there was only ruins. He couldn't sense any signs of life. However, one could see that in this world, there seemed to be something unknown moving mechanically in the distance. Now that we've entered the ruins, what we get will depend on our own abilities. Let's split up here. Otherwise, if the distribution is uneven, it might cause a fight, someone from Sect suggested. They had made ample preparations and knew many secrets about this place. Therefore, he suggested that they split up. The sect was mainly on guard against the Heaven Parting sect. The Heaven Departing sect was very powerful. Who knew what other tricks they had up their sleeves? They didn't expect to be intercepted in the end. Therefore, as soon as this statement was made, several sects seconded it. The 2 elders of Heaven Parting sect furrowed their brows. However, everyone had already suggested it. They couldn't say anything. Now, everyone had chosen a direction. As for what they would get in the end, it would all depend on their luck. The people from the various sects were all very shrewd. They all had some understanding of the ruins. He was confident that he could obtain some good fortune from this place. Therefore, after splitting up, they quickly headed in the same direction. At this moment, Wang Yu's master in Heaven Parting sect said coldly, "Those sects are all old foxes. Now that they've split up, it seems like they're already on guard against us." After seeing everyone leave, Wang Yu's master still didn't reveal his identity for the sake of being cautious. His seniority was very high. Even the 2 elders had to address him as a senior. At this moment, he placed his hands behind his back and said, "However, we'll have to gather in the end. We'll take action then. This ruin has a huge connection with our Heaven Parting sect. The good fortune inside belongs to our Heaven Parting sect." After saying that, he hid among the disciples. The 2 elders were still leading the group. "There's still danger here. Don't let your guard down," the elder reminded. At this moment, a map had appeared in their hands at an unknown time. On the map, it accurately marked the center of the remnant. Lin Yu had already left the group. Although he wasn't familiar with the ruins, he could still deduce where the things he needed were through the origin ancient characters. He was moving forward quickly. There was still danger here. However, Lin Yu wasn't afraid. That was because he had already deduced it before this. The 2 people from a few years ago had also entered this place. Moreover, they hadn't died. Therefore, Lin Yu could follow the path that the 2 of them had taken and move forward safely. Moreover, the 2 of them seemed to know about this ruin. Therefore, their paths were correct and led to the deepest part. After spending a few days, Lin Yu avoided the ghost-like puppets and finally arrived at the deepest part. There was a huge palace in the center. It was made of stone and had an ancient feel to it. Lin Yu knew that this was definitely not made by that expert 2,000 years ago. It came from somewhere else. The aura of time that was emitted from it had already surpassed tens of thousands of years. It had an immortal and indestructible aura. However, It was unknown what it had experienced. This stone palace was still dilapidated. There was a large circular hole on the roof. It seemed to have been pierced by someone with a finger. There was an aura that Lin Yu was familiar with. The aura above the stone palace was very similar to the stone city in the realm sea. It seemed to be from the same body. Lin Yu didn't hesitate and directly stepped into it. Time flies. The aura here was completely different. There was a strange aura. Countless ghosts could be seen roaming about within it. They were wearing standard armor. Although it had long decayed, it still gave one a feeling of fear. These soldiers, Lin Yu was now certain. This should be the palace that the expert from back then had entered the depths of the Forbidden Land and brought out from there. The aura of reincarnation on it was very strong. Moreover, the appearance of the ghosts was somewhat similar to the Een soldiers that Lin Yu had seen before. What is the connection between this Forbidden Land and the Stone City? Lin Yu was now in doubt. Back then, he saw the souls of the darkness divine, official, and the great sun boundless Buddha. They had also entered the reincarnation road. Did they also come to this world? Lin Yu could only confirm this after he became stronger. The most important thing now was to obtain the Tao induction scripture. Now that he had reached a bottleneck, he lacked the follow-up scripture. That was why he was stagnant. The Tao induction scripture was very mysterious. Lin Yu needed to use this scripture to complete his path forward. Chapter 1419. Lin Yu guessed that this Tao induction scripture might have been left behind by an utmost being of this world back then as well. This was just the first half of the scripture, and yet it was already this mysterious. The reason why Lin Yu could level up so quickly during this period of time was because of this Tao induction scripture. This scripture could remove the side effects of pills. It would allow one to level up rapidly without any period of fatigue. As Lin Yu continued moving forward, the environment around him changed once more. There was a forest of swords here. The peaks were all gigantic swords. Is this the mystic skill of that powerful being from back then? Lin Yu looked at the forest of swords and asked slowly. Seems like that powerful being from back then was at least at the 9th step. Lin Yu replied slowly. Lin Yu looked at the forest of swords indifferently. Even now, there was still a blazing sword while permeating the air. This was the mystic skill that the powerful being from back then had evolved. However, he could not escape the fate of being corroded by the will of reincarnation at the end of the day. He had fallen here and could only evolve into this set of ruins for the future generations to obtain the legacy of this place. Lin Yu was filled with admiration. However, this also showed how strong the forbidden ground was. From a forest of swords, Lin Yu could tell that the will of reincarnation wasn't the only thing within. This didn't seem to be the main reason for the fall of that powerful being. There's another source of power that lies within the depths of the forbidden ground. Lin Yu was certain now. If that was the case, if Lin Yu wanted to enter, he would have to be at the 9th step at the very least. Towards the later stages, the progress of one's strength would be slower. If he didn't have any great transformations, Lin Yu did not know how long it would take for him to reach the 9th step if he were to cultivate according to the rules. Lin Yu estimated that if he wanted to recover his strength, he would have to be at the 8th step at the very least. At the thought of this, Lin Yu could consider leaving the Chu country after obtaining the Tao induction scripture. He could look for other strong places to obtain opportunities and transformations. As he continued moving forward, Lin Yu saw the bloodstains in front of him. The bloodstain had already dried up, but it was still very fresh. It was left behind not too long ago. The two of them also entered this place. However, he was injured for some unknown reason. Just as Lin Yu took a step forward, terrifying sword chi appeared here. Although under the passage of time, it had been greatly worn down. However, it still carried a sharp aura, as if it could traverse the 9 heavens. Lin Yu saw his master's heroic spirit from the sword chi. After drinking a cup of wine, even the heavens and the earth could be slashed. Lin Yu was affected by this state of mind. As he stretched out his finger, it turned into a sharp sword chi. Lin Yu had once obtained the imperial sword art from Patriarch Lu. As his cultivation base continued to climb, he had been able to evolve this magical art. He could now emit sword chi from within his body. although this was not as profound as the sword energy. However, with Lin Yu's Tao Induction Scripture's fifth step strength, this sword chi was easily dealt with. However, this was not the end, but the beginning. After Lin Yu dealt with the first sword chi, the aura here also became more and more terrifying. Endless sword chi turned into a storm and charged towards Lin Yu. This was the sword energy of annihilation. Under the sixth step, no one could stop it. Although Lin Yu's cultivation base was only at the fifth step, he was still unaffected by the sword chi here. With his strength, he could even fight against someone at the seventh step. "This sword chi can't stop me," Lin Yu said indifferently. Endless sword chi appeared on his body. Since the owner of this place was once an expert with the sword, there was no harm in using the same method to deal with it. The sword chi of the void was constantly colliding, and at this moment, there was a terrifying sound of metal clashing. In the end, Lin Yu used all his strength. The wind and clouds reversed. Boom! The sword chi swept out, and a strand of hair by Lin Yu's ear was cut off. However, the sword chi here had all disappeared. After all the sword chi dissipated, Lin Yu stood on the spot and comprehended something in his heart. Through the sword chi here, he comprehended some things. The Dharma of this world was different from what Lin Yu had seen in the universe and the land of origin. It seemed that it did not need to rely on the Dharma laws of heaven and earth, but used one's own Dharma. One's own Dharma. Lin Yu also comprehended something from it. Sword Tao, reincarnation, great Tao. They're all a kind of Tao. Now that I'm using the reincarnation great Tao, the powerhouses here use their own Dharma. Lin Yu gradually understood. When was the great Tao born, and when was it destroyed? If one's own Dharma, they would not be restrained by heaven and earth. Lin Yu began to examine himself. He had only completely mastered the reincarnation great Tao, but it did not belong to him. It belonged to heaven and earth. If heaven and earth were destroyed, wouldn't the source of his strength be severed? Thinking of this, Lin Yu thought that he had to completely refine his own great Tao into his body, or completely transform the reincarnation great Tao into his own Tao. After coming to this realization, Lin Yu's eyes became deep and profound. He continued to move forward. There was no danger at the back. This was a pure land. One could see that the jade grass was lush and the jade trees were jagged. There were two people sitting cross-legged inside. They were constantly comprehending, and the sound of chanting was coming from somewhere. Their expressions were calm and peaceful, as if they were in a deep state of Tao comprehension. However, as time passed, small beads of sweat gradually appeared on their faces. It seemed that they could not comprehend such a profound scripture. Now, their bodies were gradually turning illusory, as if they were about to turn into Tao. If this continued, they might die. And now, they were already deeply immersed in it and could not extricate themselves. "Forget it," Lin Yu said indifferently. One of the purposes of his trip was to end the karma between him and the Grand Elder. Therefore, saving these two people was also one of the plans. Lin Yu stepped into this place and instantly understood. This grand chanting was talking about the Tao Induction Scripture. Lin Yu stood where he was. It didn't take long for the strange phenomena to surround him. Lin Yu's meridians and pores were moving rhythmically with the sound of the scripture. This was a complete scripture, unlike Lin Yu's incomplete scripture. The scripture's Tao laws were endless and profound, as if it was explaining Tao and logic. It was very profound. Even Lin Yu's insight was difficult to comprehend in a short period of time. After coming into contact with the complete scripture, Lin Yu was sure that this Tao Induction Scripture was definitely incomparably profound. It might have surpassed the utmost being. This made Lin Yu feel a wave of shock. Could there be an existence that has surpassed the utmost being in this world? Lin Yu was in disbelief. He did not continue to think about the next step, because if that was the case, then this world would be too terrifying. However, Lin Yu thought of another possibility, which was that this Tao Induction Scripture was not created by humans, but was born between heaven and earth. This was because the scripture was too profound. Even the current Lin Yu benefited greatly from the chanting of the scripture. He seemed to have a different kind of enlightenment. As time went by, The chanting of the scripture here gradually evolved into symbols and slowly imprinted into Lin Yu's sea of consciousness. A few symbols contained all kinds of changes. The complete scripture was obtained by Lin Yu. The jade grass and jade trees in this place were rapidly withering. At the same time, a stream of silk entered Lin Yu's sea of consciousness. This was left behind by that expert. It contained pure energy. A figure appeared in front of Lin Yu, Ancestor Lu. Lin Yu was all too familiar with this figure. In terms of temperament, they were almost exactly the same, but in terms of clothing, there was a difference. Seems like you came from the world behind the forbidden grounds. The figure that looked like Ancestor Lu said slowly. Chapter 14:20. He seemed to know many secrets and could tell Lin Yu's current identity. Lin Yu looked calmly at the man who looked like Ancestor Lu and said, "You're not Ancestor Lu, but your aura and appearance are too similar." He didn't deny that he was someone from the forbidden area. The man who looked like Ancestor Lu had an indifferent look in his eyes as he said, "It seems that the prophecy of my previous life is about to come true. Someone from the forbidden area has arrived, and this world is about to be overturned." The man seemed to be immersed in his memories as he said, "But the timing seems to be wrong. No matter what, there's too much filth in this world, and it's time to clean it up." After saying that, his figure slowly dissipated. He didn't have any reservations about Lin Yu obtaining his technique because he was an outsider. It seemed that he did it deliberately, or it was based on some kind of fate. The inheritance here had been waiting for Lin Yu's arrival. Lin Yu didn't understand what the man who looked like Ancestor Lu said. The world behind the Forbidden Lands. Could it be that this world was the true Great World? Lin Yu didn't think about it. Now that he had obtained the inheritance here, the pure power of the fruit of Tao was slowly fusing into Lin Yu's body. At this moment, the two people also woke up. His face was very pale, as if he had experienced something very terrifying. But when they saw Lin Yu, they were shocked and immediately knelt on the ground, hurriedly saying, "Greetings, Senior." The pressure that Lin Yu had displayed that day still made the two of them feel a lingering fear. The woman's face was beautiful with a sense of elegance. At this moment, she also knelt on the ground respectfully. She didn't belong to the Chu country, but came from the more powerful ancient country of North Star. As the daughter of a marquis, she naturally knew how powerful Lin Yu was. She had never seen such an expert, even when she participated in the national sacrificial ceremony. Even if Lin Yu was only at the 5th step now, his faintly discernible temperament could be felt. In particular, Lin Yu could easily resolve the crisis here. Although they didn't know if Lin Yu had obtained the fortune here, they did not dwell on it. They were afraid that Lin Yu had already seen through their thoughts. There is no need to stand on ceremony. I am acquainted with the first elder of the Heaven Parting sect. One of my objectives for coming here today is to save all of you. Lin Yu spoke in a faint voice. Parting Heaven sect. The man fell into silence. Back then, they had been chased by a certain upper echelon of the Heaven Departing sect. In the end, they had no choice but to flee into this forbidden area. In the end, he risked his life to come here. If not for the fact that Lin Yu had recovered at that time and naturally emitted that mysterious power that healed the two of them, they would not have been able to escape. Most likely, they had already perished in the forbidden grounds, buried in the stomachs of the beasts. However, the two of them had also obtained great benefits. Especially on the man's body, there was a faintly discernible sword chi that seemed to be about to burst out. He had obtained part of the inheritance of the expert in the ruins and was now at the peak of the 5th step. He was already an expert in the Blazing Sky sect. Senior, may I ask how my father is now? The man asked. The father he was referring to was naturally the first elder. The man had been intelligent since he was young. When he was young, he had traveled the world. In the end, he left the Chu country and got to know a woman. However, on the way back to the Chu country, he was chased by a mysterious person. If not for the fact that the man had obtained many opportunities in the process of traveling and had a solid foundation in his strength, he would have met with disaster when he set foot in the Chu country. However, there was always a way out. It could be considered a coincidence that the man was able to survive. Since you're alive, I'll bring you out. The Blazing Sky sect will not be able to do anything to you, Lin Yu said slowly. After obtaining the complete Tao induction scripture and the inheritance of the expert in the ruins, his cultivation base had naturally reached the 6th step. A wave of pressure formed. This caused the hearts of the two men to palpitate. Although Lin Yu was only a realm higher than them, they felt that it was different. It was like the difference between heaven and earth. It was as if they were separated by a chasm. They did not understand how such a difference could be formed. However, when they thought of the state that Lin Yu had shown when he was revived, they immediately understood. They guessed that Lin Yu's cultivation base was far beyond the 6th step. It was unknown how much higher it was. However, after entering the forbidden grounds, his foundation had been eroded, causing his cultivation base to fall. It was just that he was still in the process of recovering. However, after receiving Lin Yu's promise, the two of them became even more confident. The two men were filled with confidence. Clearly, there were people in the Blazing Sky sect who did not want him to return. Back then, the first elder was a strong contender for the position of the Blazing Sky sect's sect master. Now that the first elder's son, who was terrifyingly talented, had returned to the Blazing Sky sect, it would only affect one person. That would be the son of the sect master who was about to be appointed as the sect master's successor. The man understood in his heart. Now that his cultivation base had reached such a level, he knew that other than the sect master and those old monsters who had cultivated for many years, even some of the upper echelons of the Blazing Sky sect would not be a threat to him. It's a pity that I broke through too late. Otherwise, you wouldn't have suffered so much, the man said slowly to the woman beside him. As long as I can be with you, I'm not afraid of any suffering, the woman said. Their eyes were filled with deep love. After the injuries on their bodies had subsided, Senior, thank you for protecting us, the man stood up. Just as they were about to leave, a group of people walked out of the sword forest in front of them. It was the Blazing Sky sect. They had used the sky gauging umbrella to reach this place. The sky gauging umbrella, which was the sect's weapon, had a few big holes. Essence chi was leaking out, and it was obviously severely damaged. Someone beat us to it. The elder's eyes narrowed when he saw Lin Yu and the others. Master Wang Yu, who was hiding among the disciples, was also slightly surprised. He had never expected that there would be two of his enemies here. You are the son of Lin Yu and the great elder from the outer sect, the leading elder said in a serious tone. Lin Yu looked at the elders calmly. If you get out of the way now, you might still have a chance to live, Lin Yu said indifferently. They were all instructed by Master Wang Yu to come to the forbidden area to deal with the great elder's son. It could be said that those who came here were all the direct descendants of the sect master. In the face of Lin Yu's casual tone, the two elders couldn't help but laugh out loud. With a sinister look in their eyes, they said, "You're just an outer sect disciple. Do you think you can overturn the heavens?" Lin Yu's aura had been concealed. Therefore, they didn't know that Lin Yu's current cultivation was comparable to the sect master's. Master Wang Yu, who was hiding among the disciples, saw Lin Yu and the great elder's son, but he didn't rush to show himself. He was very cautious and wanted to know. He wanted to know if they had any hidden methods or if the great elder had given them any divine items. Do it. Master Wang Yu, who was at the peak of the 5th step, transmitted his voice at this time. The two elders didn't hesitate. Now that they were at the 5th step, the divine power on their bodies turned into torrential flames and directly attacked Lin Yu and the man. Puff! 2 streams of scarlet blood splattered. With a sinister look, the two elders' bodies fell to the ground. Unsurprisingly, the two elders at the 5th step were directly killed by Lin Yu. There was a bottleneck between the 5th and 6th step, and the gap was huge. Now that Lin Yu had reached the 6th step, he had mastered a supreme technique like the Tao induction scripture. The refinement of his cultivation had reached a shocking level. Chapter 14:21. Now, killing 2 5th-step cultivators was a piece of cake for him, and he could do it casually. At this moment, all of the surviving disciples who had followed him were shocked. They had all seen Lin Yu in the handyman selection. They clearly remembered that Lin Yu was only a 2nd-step cultivator a year ago. Although he had killed Wang Yu, who was a third-step cultivator, it had shocked them greatly. But now a fifth-step elder could not even withstand a single blow from Lin Yu. They could not imagine how terrifying Lin Yu's strength was now. At this moment, Lin Yu locked onto Wang Yu's master, who was hiding among the disciples. "Do you think you can escape today?" Lin Yu said indifferently. At this moment, Wang Yu's master, under the fearful gazes of the disciples, was continuously retreating. He did not expect Lin Yu's strength to be so terrifying in just a short period of time. He could kill cultivators of the same level as him with a raise of his hand. Even if he was at the peak of the fifth step, he would not be Lin Yu's opponent. He only had one thought now. Where there was life, there was hope. He could only return to the sect and ask the sect master to make a decision. But now that Lin Yu had seen through his identity, it would be difficult for him to escape. Lin Yu had locked onto him. It made Wang Yu's master's hair stand on end. "Do you want to be exterminated?" Wang Yu's master walked out and returned to his old appearance. The disciples opened up a path for him, but they did not know that Wang Yu's master, as the leader of the Blazing Heaven sect, had also hidden himself and entered here. Lin Yu looked at Wang Yu's master indifferently. "I want to know what crime we have committed. Why are we regarded as traitors?" The man stepped forward and questioned Wang Yu's master. He had just stepped into Chu country and was severely injured by a mysterious person. In the end, he was even accused by the Blazing Heaven sect. "You betrayed Blazing Heaven and joined forces with this demonic woman to kill the disciples of my sect. Isn't that enough?" Elder Wang Yu slowly said. His aura was very well hidden. Wang Yu's master wanted to activate the power of the Sky umbrella and activate the restrictions within. Even if it meant detonating the umbrella, he wanted to crush Lin Yu to pieces. He didn't know Lin Yu's current cultivation level, but he wanted to kill him with one strike. He couldn't hold back at all. Even if the gauging sky umbrella was the sect's most important weapon, it was worth it to kill the man and Lin Yu. The sky gauging umbrella carried a mighty force. At this moment, it appeared directly behind Wang Yu's master. "If you want to condemn someone, you can always find a pretext," Lin Yu said indifferently. "As long as you are strong, no one will dare to say anything." He didn't give Wang Yu's master the slightest chance and directly attacked. Before Wang Yu's master could activate the sky gauze umbrella, Zhang Xin tapped out with his finger. A burst of sword qi shot out, piercing through Wang Yu's head. The man was a little surprised by Lin Yu's methods. He didn't expect that Lin Yu would have mastered the sword qi that he had spent a few years comprehending. Moreover, it seemed to be even more profound. The man sighed in his heart. It was because his cultivation level wasn't high enough that it led to this situation. He let the great elder suffer the pain of losing his son alone in the outer sect. Lin Yu didn't kill too many of these disciples and let them leave. After returning to the outer sect, only the great elder and the man would go to heaven-parting sect to seek an explanation. When the time came, the truth would be revealed. He was indebted to the great elder. Lin Yu thought that he could go to heaven-parting sect and help the great elder. After all, the great elder had entered the ruins and was severely injured. His cultivation level had dropped. The man was only at the fifth step of cultivation. If they encountered the sect master, it would be difficult for them to wash away the injustice. "Let's go back to heaven-parting sect. After I settle the last thing, I will leave," Lin Yu said to the man. Soon, the three of them walked out of the ruins. It was much faster to go back the way they came. It was just a few months' time. The three of them walked out of the forbidden grounds. They then approached heaven-parting sect quickly. Amidst the swirling clouds, halfway up the mountain was the residence of the outer sect. The great elder seemed to have sensed something long ago. At this moment, he appeared at the entrance of the outer sect. "You're back." The great elder looked at the man who looked 70% similar to himself when he was young. His eyes were filled with gratification. "I'm sorry, father." The man's eyes were filled with tears as he knelt down on the ground immediately. "Greetings, father." The woman knelt down on the ground obediently. The great elder could naturally tell the relationship between his son and the woman. He didn't say much about his son finding a Tao companion. Now that he saw them return safely, the great elder was the happiest. "It was Senior Lin Yu who saved us and brought us out of the ruins." If it wasn't for Senior Lin Yu, I'm afraid that both of us would have perished in there. The man said seriously. The great elder had long guessed Lin Yu's identity. However, due to his character, he had never asked too much. Thank you, the great elder said sincerely. He knew that Lin Yu's identity wasn't ordinary. Therefore, he didn't refer to himself as a senior and didn't address him as such. This is the karma between you and me, Lin Yu said slowly. The upper echelons have already locked onto this place. Why don't we go to the main hall today and clarify everything so that you guys can be cleared of this? Lin Yu continued. When he found out that his son was being hunted down by heaven-parting sect, a rare killing intent appeared in the great elder's eyes. All of this originated from me and the sect master. Now, it's time to put an end to it. The grudges of the previous generation shouldn't extend to the next generation. The great elder looked at his son. Now that he had a Tao companion, it meant that he had something to worry about. The great elder didn't want them to continue putting themselves in danger. Since Father wants to seek justice for us, why should I be afraid? The man's eyes were filled with determination. He followed behind the great elder. The few of them arrived at the main hall. The main hall towered under the sky. It was the peak of the highest mountain in heaven-parting sect. A grand hall stood on a large platform. The glazed tiles were overflowing with color, and the cinnabar walls were enshrouded in red light. Every part of the hall was extraordinary. Those who came here couldn't help but feel a sense of solemnity in their hearts. Lin Yu had also come here. He was prepared to leave the Chu country after settling this last matter, to explore a wider world. Lin Yu didn't know how long he had been in this world. It had been 2 to 3 years since he'd awakened. Although 2 to 3 years was just the blink of an eye for an expert, it was incomparably precious to Lin Yu. He didn't know what had happened in the universe and the land of origin. Lin Yu wasn't there, so it was difficult to understand. Lin Yu didn't know whether the final black calamity had arrived. Therefore, he needed to return to the land of origin as soon as possible. However, there seemed to be something terrifying in the Forbidden Land that would block Lin Yu's path. To be on the safe side, Lin Yu needed to increase his cultivation. In the main hall, there were already a few people waiting for them. The leader was dressed in a green Tao robe and exuded a powerful aura. He had an indifferent temperament. He slowly turned his head with his hand behind his back and said, "Junior brother, long time no see. Senior brother, you know why I'm here today. There's no need to beat around the bush." Chapter 14:22. Why do you want to kill me? The first elder questioned. This matter involved the fact that the first elder was severely injured and his cultivation realm had dropped. The first elder had never mentioned this to anyone else. However, the sect leader knew clearly the reason for the first elder's injury. This matter had a lot to do with him as well. That was the reason why the great elder said that he wanted to exterminate his bloodline. Because your lineage is too dishonest. The sect leader no longer hid anything, as he said indifferently. Back then, Master was prepared to pass down the position to you. Even though you were indifferent and disliked management, how could I not be jealous? I'm afraid that if I hadn't used some tricks in the ruins to destroy your foundation, I wouldn't have been the sect leader by now. The sect leader continued. Let's not talk about the fact that you injured me. However, you have to give an explanation to my son for being so overbearing. The first elder became extremely domineering. With the cultivation realm that you crippled, the sect leader looked at the first elder coldly. Now that things had come to this, it wasn't something that could be resolved with words. At this moment, the man stood out. There was a sharp fighting spirit in his eyes. First elder, are you going to make a move? Lin Yu asked indifferently. Let me give it a try and see what realm my senior brother has reached. The first elder said indifferently. His cultivation realm started to emanate from his body. Lin Yu nodded his head. He didn't interfere too much. This was because he knew that even though the Tao induction scripture that the first elder cultivated was incomplete, his cultivation realm had dropped, and he was only at the 5th step. However, it wasn't impossible for him to fight someone of a higher realm. Furthermore, the first elder had been at the 5th step for many years. Now, he couldn't be measured by the usual 5th step. Right now, Lin Yu was looking at a man who was hidden in a black robe in the main hall. His eyes narrowed slightly. This man's cultivation realm seemed to have surpassed the sixth step and was at the seventh step. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be such a powerful person in the heaven-departing sect. The first elder's aura wasn't any weaker than the sect leader's. At this moment, the two of them had already collided. The man had also encountered the youngest son of the sect leader. This was the hatred of a single bloodline. Lin Yu stared at the black-robed man. If he were to make a move, the first elder and his son would have no chance of winning. Lin Yu's aura locked onto the black-robed man. How can a cultivator of the sixth step sense me? That person's lips curled up in curiosity. With a thought, he appeared right in front of Lin Yu. Then the withered hand reached out. Bang! The sound of intense collisions formed layers upon layers of airwaves. The sandalwood tables and chairs in the main hall were shattered inch by inch, turning into powder. Lin Yu and the black-robed man both retreated 20 feet. It could be clearly seen that the black-robed man's arms spasmed for a moment. At the same time, there was a trace of shock in his eyes that were covered. He did not expect that a six-step cultivator would have such terrifying physical strength. Kid, you have quite the background. The black-robed man slowly opened his mouth. Even though he was defeated in the first exchange, his curiosity about Lin Yu grew stronger. You're not bad yourself, Lin Yu said slowly. In the first exchange, Lin Yu was already certain that this person was not from Chu. His gaze had stopped on the woman, which meant that he might be from the North Star ancient nation. A seven-step cultivator had personally come to Chu. The woman's identity might be special. You're here to find her. I advise you not to interfere with the matters here, Lin Yu said calmly. He was not threatening, but simply informing the black-robed man. If the black-robed man wanted to make a move, Lin Yu did not mind killing him. You think you can kill me? The black-robed man's interest was piqued, and he was curious. You can try, Lin Yu said again. His eyes remained calm the entire time. A seven-step cultivator was not an invincible existence to Lin Yu. Even if he did not use the power of the king's token, Lin Yu could still kill him. However, the black-robed man also realized that Lin Yu's words were not a joke. Therefore, he did not continue to make a move. He was only here for the woman. Therefore, he did not pay much attention to the internal strife of the sky-leaving sect. I did not expect that there would be such a young cultivator in the sky-leaving sect. This is really unexpected. Seems like the day when the sky-leaving sect unifies Chu is not far away, the black-robed man said slowly. You flatter me, Lin Yu replied. He did not have any deep hatred for the black-robed man. Therefore, there was no need for him to fight to the death. The two of them stood calmly on the spot, watching the two battles. With a thought, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with a terrifying sword light. As the sword light flashed, a person who was trying to harm the first elder was sliced in half at the waist. Instantly, his aura was cut off. This scene scared the rest of the people in the hall. No one dared to act rashly in the face of such a terrifying aura. Looking at your methods, you don't seem to be from the orthodox sky-leaving sect, the black-robed man said again. However, at this moment, he seemed to have received some information. Hidden under the black robe, his face turned serious. When he looked at Lin Yu again, his eyes seemed to be different. Lin Yu could also feel this change. However, Lin Yu did not know why this was the case. The battle was still ongoing. A restriction appeared in the main hall, protecting it from being damaged. Lin Yu could now sense that there was a pure and powerful aura leaking out from a secret place in Blazing Heaven sect. The old monster of the sky-leaving sect has awakened, the black-robed man said slowly. He did not seem to be old. Therefore, he had a playful heart. At this moment, facing the awakening of the old monster of the sky-leaving sect, he was not afraid at all. Instead, he was looking forward to it. Indeed, there is such a powerful person in the sky-leaving sect, Lin Yu said in a low voice. This was definitely a seventh-step powerful person. Moreover, he had a deep foundation in the seventh step. Even Lin Yu would have trouble dealing with him now. I hope that you will not side with anyone, Lin Yu said calmly. At this moment, a decaying figure had appeared in the main hall without anyone noticing. It was a gray-robed man. His face was full of wrinkles like dried tree bark. As he moved, his wrinkles could fall off. In his turbid eyes, he could not see anything. However, when the aura from his body was released, the figures of the first elder and the others were restrained and fell to the ground. "We are all from a sky-leaving sect. Why are you killing us?" His hoarse voice rang out slowly. The frightening oppressive might caused even the first elder and the headmaster to be unable to withstand it. "Old ancestor, I will wait." The sect master wanted to speak. "I did not ask you to speak." The old man's words shut the sect master up. As he closed his eyes, he saw a middle-aged man with a sword in his arms walk up to the old man and tell him everything. As the sect master, instead of thinking about how to strengthen the sect, you are thinking about internal friction. "Your sect will face the wall for 500 years, the old ancestor said directly. "As the first elder of the outer sect and my disciple's grandson, if you do not respect him, how can the sky-leaving sect set the rule? Face the wall for 10 years. The old ancestor looked at the first elder. "Old ancestor, this." The sect master wanted to speak. The difference between 500 years and 10 years was too big. The sect master could not accept it. Chapter 14:23. He wasn't being biased. The ancestor of Blazing Sky sect already knew what had happened to the first elder. However, he didn't expect the sect master's descendants to want to kill them all. "Humph! Don't you know what you have done? 500 years is considered too little." The ancestor said, "The sect master of Blazing Sky sect will be managed by the first elder's son. We will talk about the rest after 500 years." The ancestor said flatly. In the end, the sect master was stripped of his crown and his face was filled with sadness. He knew that after 500 years, no one in Blazing Sky sect would recognize him. This was equivalent to stripping him of his position as the sect master. However, now that the ancestor had come out of seclusion, no one dared to disobey his orders. Lin Yu looked on indifferently from the beginning to the end, until everything calmed down. The ancestor of Blazing Sky sect finally noticed the black-robed man and Lin Yu. In his eyes, there was an almost imperceptible movement. He could tell that Lin Yu and the black-robed man weren't simple people. "I originally came here to bring back the princess of the North Star ancient country. However, I no longer have that intention." The black-robed man revealed his background. When the ancestor of Blazing Sky sect heard the black-robed man's background, he couldn't help but feel his heart palpitate. However, he was the ancestor of a sect after all. His mental state was terrifying, and he quickly recovered. "So, it's an expert from the North Star ancient country. Please take a seat." The ancestor waved his sleeves, and the tables and chairs returned to their original state. He ordered the man who was carrying a sword beside him to pour tea for each of them. After a short moment of understanding, the ancestor of Blazing Sky sect found out that the woman brought back by the first elder son was the eldest daughter of a marquis in the North Star ancient country. The two of them loved each other and decided to return to Blazing Sky sect. However, they didn't want to be surrounded and killed. Fortunately, the princess is fine. Otherwise, even 10 Blazing Sky sects would be destroyed. The black-robed man said calmly. That wasn't all. The North Star ancient country had an unimaginable amount of territory and ruled over countless living beings. It was one of the strongest ancient countries in the East. The Marquis ruled over a region, and there were countless experts under him. This seventh-step expert cultivation was not considered top-notch in the Marquis fiefdom. He was ordered to come here to pass on the news of Fu Wang-ho. Eldest princess, the Marquis said that if you have made up your mind, he will not stop you. He only hopes that you can go back and spend time with your parents when you are free, the black-robed man said slowly to the girl after drinking the tea. Got it. The woman's eyes were filled with tears. Her love with a man was stopped by the entire vassal state, and in the end, she was forced to elope. Also, if you're bullied again, he won't spare that brat, the black-robed man continued. The patriarch of the Parting Sky sect laughed and said, Envoy, you don't have to worry about this. Even if the eldest princess is wronged here, I will not let this brat off. The old ancestor of Parting Heaven's sect patted his chest and guaranteed. This could be considered a marriage alliance. This also meant that his Blazing Sky sect was now closely related to the Fu nation of the Gauchan ancient nation. This would undoubtedly raise the status of the Parting Heavens sect to another level. With the support of the vassal states, the Parting Heavens sect would definitely develop rapidly again. The patriarch of the Parting Skies sect looked at the first elder's son with gratification. In the end, the first elder would not have to face the wall. Immediately bring the betrothal gifts and go to the Gauchan ancient nation. Since the eldest princess is married here, she cannot be wronged. The patriarch of the Parting Skies sect made a prompt decision. He ordered people to prepare many divine items. He also personally wrote the letter of engagement. No one said anything about the relationship between the two of them. They had experienced life and death along the way and were already unswerving in their loyalty. Now that they had obtained the permission of the girl's father, it was the best thing for them. No matter how this marriage would affect the Parting Skies sect, the man had to marry the girl. I'm only responsible for passing the message. As for when you will go, it has nothing to do with me, the black-robed man said. Envoy, don't you want to stay for a few more days? The patriarch of the Parting Skies sect asked. The black-robed man waved his hand and said, Wu is not considered a subordinate of the Fu Marquis. I'm just doing it in passing. With that, he turned to leave. However, he quickly turned his head to look at Lin Yu and said, I wonder if this little fellow cultivator is willing to leave with me? The black-robed man invited him. Sure. Lin Yu nodded his head. Although he had exchanged blows with the black-robed man earlier on, it was just a casual test. Now that Lin Yu needed to go to a wider world, he would inevitably need the help of the black-robed man to understand the Gauchan ancient nation. Therefore, Lin Yu did not reject. When the great elder saw that Lin Yu was about to leave, he did not say anything. The Parting Skies sect could not keep Lin Yu in the first place. He had a wider world. Before long, the news of Lin Yu's departure spread throughout the outer yard and inner yard. Lin Yu had only been here for a short year. However, he had left behind an endless legend in the Parting Skies sect. It would probably be difficult to break this legend in the endless years to come. Lin Yu brought the black-robed man to his residence in the outer yard. Although Lin Yu's state of mind was usually very calm and indifferent. However, he was a person who valued relationships. Yu Weiwei, who was in the cave, had fallen asleep on the table while waiting for Lin Yu. He did not disturb Yu Weiwei. Instead, he left behind a few elixirs. There was no lack of grade 4 elixirs, which were enough for Yu Weiwei to enter the inner sect. Lin Yu and the black-robed man were ready to leave. At this moment, Zheng Yu caught up with him. Her eyes were filled with tears as she asked, Are you really going to leave? There was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. She hoped that Lin Yu would change his mind. However, Lin Yu's current plan was obviously not about romance. He naturally knew what Zheng Yu was thinking about him. Lin Yu nodded his head and dispelled Zheng Yu's fantasy. Then are you still coming back? Zheng Yu was hopeful. I'm not coming back, Lin Yu replied indifferently. If there was a chance, he might go to the depths of the Forbidden Grounds to find a way to return after he had completely recovered his cultivation in the Gauchan ancient nation. Zheng Yu was stunned on the spot. You deserve someone better, Lin Yu said and disappeared with the black-robed man. Zheng Yu squatted on the ground and cried for a long time. Lin Yu and the black-robed man arrived at the border between Chu country and the Gauchan ancient nation in half a month. There was a wide river here. Legend had it that it was formed by the meridians of an immortal after he died. The river water was the immortal's blood. There was a strange power on the river that made it difficult for cultivators to fly. They could only cross it with the help of boats. When Lin Yu and the black-robed man arrived, it was the middle of winter and snow was falling. Soon, the entire world was covered in silver and there was a sense of emptiness. An old man in a straw raincoat was rowing a boat. He came to the two of them and said with a smile, Do you two need to cross the river? Yes, the black-robed man said. He took out a few golden leaves and handed them to the old man. The old man looked at the golden leaves and said happily, Brothers, please board the boat. The moment Lin Yu stepped onto the boat, an inexplicable sense of melancholy surged in his heart. He seemed to have been here before, or rather, he was familiar with the boat. Is the future irreversible? Lin Yu muttered softly. The boat swayed. The old man was very experienced. He had made a living by carrying people across rivers. Chapter 14:24. The surface of the river was vast, and the snow danced in the air. There was a sense of vastness in the world. "What's on your mind?" The black-robed man was meticulous. He looked at Lin Yu and asked with a smile. The black-robed man had yet to reveal his true appearance. There seemed to be a mist around him. It was a special Dharma artifact that could hide his face. "I just felt something when I looked at the vast river," Lin Yu said. At this moment, he had already collected his thoughts and said calmly, "I'm sure you've already guessed my identity." Lin Yu looked at the black-robed man. Lin Yu already knew a thing or two from the black-robed man's reaction in the main hall of the Litian sect not long ago. Some things and words have become taboo in this era, so it's not convenient to talk about it in detail. "Although I'm not sure, I'm 70% sure about your identity," the black-robed man said directly without hiding anything. He had already guessed that Lin Yu was not from this world. Since he did not attack Lin Yu, he must have other considerations. Lin Yu's divine will was probably above the 8th step. He did not sense any malice from the black-robed man. In other words, the black-robed man and the forces behind him did not have any malice towards him. Lin Yu did not know why. However, Lin Yu only wanted to recover his strength as soon as possible. As for other things, he did not need to think too much. "You're smarter than I thought," the black-robed man said slowly. Lin Yu did not answer. "Are you willing to join the God's Court organization?" The black-robed man directly threw out an olive branch. "What can I get?" Lin Yu asked. This was what he was concerned about. "What can you get?" "Divine objects, information, history, etc. You can get everything you want, but you need to make corresponding contributions," the black-robed man said. "Okay." Lin Yu did not hesitate. After a short consideration, he agreed directly. The black-robed man was stunned by Lin Yu's straightforward answer. "Aren't you afraid of being restrained?" The man in black was puzzled. "Aren't you also not bound?" Lin Yu said calmly. These black-robed men were also members of the Divine Court. There were no restrictions or other negative things on them, so Lin Yu could also draw a conclusion. The Divine Court didn't have many restrictions on one person. But if you join the Divine Court, it means that you will become the enemy of the entire world. "There will be no force or person in the world that can accept you," said the black-robed man. "It's okay," Lin Yu said calmly. "Can the Divine Court help me advance quickly?" "Of course." The black-robed man said, "The Divine Court has existed for countless years and has an endless foundation. Otherwise, it wouldn't have survived the encirclement of many terrifying forces in the later generations and still exists today. That is to say, although the Divine Court has a majestic name, it does some shady business." Lin Yu said, "Do you want to go back on your word now?" The black-robed man looked at Lin Yu. However, Lin Yu raised his head. He didn't think that he was a righteous person who would do anything to achieve his goals. It was just some shady business. For Lin Yu, there was nothing to be afraid of or disgusted with. The Divine Court is an assassin organization that specializes in hunting experts. The black-robed man finally said, "When the time comes, the Divine Court will arrange suitable missions for you based on the information." Lin Yu took the token given by the black-robed man. As for the clothes and other things, he would have to go to the Fuju Principality to get them from the stronghold there. "You can use your contribution points to exchange for everything you need," the black-robed man explained to Lin Yu. Joining the Divine Court didn't mean that one could get divine objects at will, but that one needed to make contributions. Lin Yu wasn't surprised by this. In the distant and unknown void, there was a palace stained with the blood of some unknown creature. After hundreds of millions of years, it still hadn't dried up. There were also a few powerful corpses hanging in it. Their blood had been drained, and they looked very ferocious. What was certain was that the people who were killed were probably at the 10th step. The person called Lin Yu has already joined the Divine Court. At this moment, a person was sitting under the throne in the main hall. There were few people beside him. Their eyes were strange. No one was sitting on the throne. It seemed that it had been empty for a long time. For countless years, the Divine Court had no leader. There were only agents. The people under the throne were the temporary agents of the Divine Court. They all had incomparably powerful auras. As they spoke, It was like a decree that could cause the void to be destroyed. If it weren't for the fact that this place was in the depths of the void, even if a few people gathered together, it would cause a terrifying phenomenon. Even a void would collapse. We've waited for who knows how long. An old man with disheveled hair said with a sigh. One could see that half of his body had already rotted. Half of his face was white bones, and the other half was flesh and blood. He looked very ferocious. It was hard to imagine that a creature could survive in such a state. The aura on his body was still blazing. It's still unknown whether it's him or not. Let's wait and see, someone said. But his heart doesn't seem to be here. He wants to go to the world behind the forbidden grounds, someone said. Take out the cage. The sinner inside isn't completely dead yet, another person said. Obviously, they knew a lot of secrets and were discussing at this moment. Every sentence was enough to shock the world. They knew too much. Back then, someone entered that place. Now that it has been exposed, I'm afraid it won't be long before someone goes to the other side of the forbidden grounds in order to trace the reincarnation, someone continued. At the mention of this, their faces were filled with grave expressions. However, their conversation was very secretive. After the conversation, the person who was left here was directly obliterated, leaving no trace of his existence. It was as if he had never been here. Lin Yu naturally didn't know about this. He was talking to the black-robed man, wanting to have a deeper understanding of the celestial court. In response to this, the old man who was rowing the boat stood at the bow and sensibly didn't listen. Instead, he was singing an unknown fisherman's song. He was just an ordinary person. He had heard a lot of the conversation between Lin Yu and the others during this period of time. Therefore, he knew that the conversations of ordinary cultivators involved secrets. If he could not stop, he would try his best not to. However, during the conversation between the two, there was a deep meaning in the old man's eyes. The fisherman's song didn't stop, and the boat was still moving forward. A few days later, the two finally reached the other side. Thank you. Lin Yu looked at the old man, handed over some golden leaves, and said, Go buy a pot of good wine. These weren't of much use to Lin Yu. The old man's fisherman's song made Lin Yu feel somewhat enlightened. Therefore, these golden leaves were worth it to Lin Yu. Thank you, little brother. After expressing his gratitude with a smile, the old man rowed the boat and left. The boat disappeared on the snowy river surface. This time, the old man said with a smile, It seems that fate is starting to spin again. Chapter 1425. Lin Yu did not notice the change in the old man's aura. They had already arrived at the Gaochen ancient country. This place was filled with a mysterious aura. The amount of Genesis Qi here was much higher than in Chu. Lin Yu finally understood why there were so many experts in the Gaochen ancient country. It was mainly due to the amount of Genesis Qi here. If he cultivated here, Lin Yu would be able to quickly advance without the support of pills. It was just that it would take more time. After the two arrived at the territory of the Gaochen ancient country, they did not stop. Instead, they stepped through the Dao Gate and headed straight for the Fuho country. The Fuho country wasn't very far from Chu. After crossing the river, they would arrive at the Fuho country after traveling another 10,000 miles. 10,000 miles was only half a day's journey for Lin Yu and Zhou Dongwang at their current cultivation level. When the sun set in the west, a golden halo shone on the white snow. Lin Yu and the other man saw a magnificent city with a sense of vicissitudes. This was the capital of the Fuho country. However, Lin Yu and Zhou Dongwang did not enter immediately. They arrived at a village dozens of miles away. The village was dilapidated and there was no one living here. This is the base of our divine court, explained the black-robed man. But they saw a few black crows on a withered ancient tree. They were cawing in the snow, giving off an ominous feeling. There were many white bones here. It seemed that this place used to be prosperous, but it was massacred for some reason. Back then, the Fuho country suspected that there were spies here, so they massacred all the residents here. The black-robed man explained, This place is desolate and uninhabited. So, our divine court chose this place as our base of communication. They arrived at an ancient well. There were a few crows on an ancient tree at the side. "Shung, you're finally back." One of the crows shouted with a hoarse voice that was close to a scream. "Damn crow, stop cawing," the black-robed man said impatiently. Every time he saw a crow, he would have a headache. But this crow had a very high status in the divine court. The black-robed man named Shung could only feel helpless. "Little Shungzi, how can you talk to Grandpa Crow like that?" Crow shrieked. As it spoke, it prepared to pounce down. Shung was obviously scared. "How many people have come to entrust this time?" Shung asked. The headquarters of the divine court wasn't here. He was just a middleman in the Fuho country. Just the contact person was already at the 7th step. It was enough to show how powerful the divine court was. 5. Crow couldn't remember clearly. It was as if he was too old and had become forgetful. "I knew it." Shung was used to it. A jade slip appeared in his hand, and he threw it into the ancient well. Several boxes appeared in the ancient well. Inside were some people's requests. There was even a deposit. Lin Yu saw that the deposit alone was a rare treasure of heaven and earth. It was of great use to experts at the 7th step or even higher. If that was the case, the strength and status of the person they wanted to assassinate would most likely have reached an extremely terrifying level. Only a few people knew about the divine court, and the contact point was the same. Even so, there were still many people who came to this place during the time that Shung was away. 7. Not bad, Shung said. This is a new member of the divine court. His name is Lin Yu. He has already received permission from the acting divine master of the divine court. Given the costume. Shung pointed at Lin Yu and said to Crow. At this time, Crow looked at Lin Yu with his scarlet eyes. The scene was silent for a moment. "Caw!" A crow's cry rang out. Crow, who was almost bald, was so shocked that a few feathers fell from his body. "What the hell? What the hell?" Crow was so frightened that he flew up. "Are you possessed?" Apparently, Shung was already used to crows fussing over nothing. But after a long time, Crow still couldn't calm down. This obviously didn't make sense. A quarter of an hour passed. Crow didn't come down from the sky. "He's afraid of me," Lin Yu said. From Crow's expression and actions, he could tell that something was wrong. But at the same time, he frowned slightly. Did Crow know him? Or did he see the power hibernating in him? After a long time, Crow slowly came back to his senses. He came to the branch and said, No, something is very wrong. You've obviously fallen. Why are you still here?" Lin Yu didn't know if Crow was talking about how he had been killed by the owner of the bronze coffin with a powerful move. "How do you know?" Lin Yu asked directly. He wanted to take advantage of the fact that Crow had not regained her composure to ask for some clues. "In that battle, you were obviously killed. I was just beside you. How can I not know?" Crow said, "I just took a few things from you. You didn't have to become a ghost and come here." Crow was still scared and looked at Lin Yu warily. Now Lin Yu was sure that Crow wasn't talking about him. Maybe it was just a living being that looked like him. There were more than billions of living beings in the world. If there was someone similar, it might not be a problem. But at the same time, Lin Yu thought of the expert who looked like Ancestor Lu in this world. Was there some secret? Lin Yu didn't know. He could only hope to learn something from Crow. From the conversation between Crow and Crow. Crow's seniority should be very high in the divine court. Although he was joking, his actions and tone were very respectful. "Then why don't you return those things to me?" Lin Yu continued. "Okay, I'll return them to you. After I get them, you'll return to dust to dust. I'll continue to be free." Crow said and was about to take out the things. But now, his mood was much calmer. When he was about to take out the items, he suddenly shouted, "No, you're not him. If you were, you would have already attacked me. Why would you say anything to me? You bad boy, how dare you cheat Grandpa Crow of his things?" With that, he was about to attack Lin Yu. "Okay, Crow Taoist, stop fooling around. He's just a new member of the divine court. As for the other things," Shung gradually became serious. It seemed that this news was very important, and he couldn't say it here. Crow calmed down. Regarding important matters, he could see it clearly. Therefore, he didn't continue to attack Lin Yu. "These are the clothes of the divine court. Boy, take them." Crow said, "Tell me what you know." Crow looked at Shung. Then he glanced at Lin Yu. It seemed that he attached great importance to Lin Yu. Perhaps it had a lot to do with the person he mentioned. Lin Yu knew a little about these things, but he didn't want to know. The most important thing now was to strengthen his own strength. Crow flapped his wings without the slightest divine power, but as the withered tree shook, Sheng and his body disappeared on the spot. Even Lin Yu couldn't deduce their location when he used the power of the ancient characters. Even with his powerful divine consciousness, he couldn't capture their location. They seemed to have disappeared from heaven and earth. Even their imprints were gone. Chapter 14:26. This surprised Lin Yu. When he used the power of the ancient characters, he had never encountered such a situation. However, Lin Yu didn't continue to try to deduce. An hour passed. Crow and Sheng appeared in the main world. Crow looked at Lin Yu strangely. There was a puzzled look on his face. He seemed to have been suspecting Lin Yu's identity. However, Lin Yu didn't know why Crow looked at him strangely. Maybe it was because he looked like an old friend of his. Lin Yu could only guess so. Since you have joined the God Court organization, I want to make it clear that the God Court doesn't kill innocent people. If you are entrusted in the future, you have to remember this, Sheng said slowly. Lin Yu nodded. He wouldn't kill innocent people either. The way the God Court organization acted was to his liking. This is the first mission. Let me see how strong you are, Sheng said at this moment. Lin Yu took the jade slip from Sheng's hand and saw that there was a person's detailed information recorded on the jade slip. This person was none other than the king of Fu Ho country. It recorded his life's deeds, slaughtering 3 cities, not sparing the old, the weak, women, and children. There were countless records about it. Lin Yu only took a simple glance. Lin Yu already knew that the king of Fu Ho country wasn't very strong. It was just that there were 2 6-step powerhouses in the residence. That was all. It wasn't difficult for Lin Yu. After Lin Yu put away the jade slip, he was ready to take action. He came to the king's city, which was very prosperous. The God Court organization had already given him a complete identity. He could freely enter and leave the king's city without being investigated. This time, Sheng didn't follow him. He seemed to have something more important to discuss with Crow. Lin Yu came to the king's city alone. He quickly understood the structure of this place. The king's residence was located at the eastern border of the king's city. It covered a large area, and it was difficult to travel around in a few hours. Lin Yu snuck in. At this time, he had already changed into the uniform of the divine court. He was dressed in black and looked very ordinary, but there was a mysterious aura on it that could conceal people's aura. Then, Lin Yu put on a ghost mask. It looked ferocious. Anyone who saw him would know that he was here to take their lives. This was the special uniform of the divine court. As long as one had the strength, there was no one who did not recognize him. When Lin Yu looked towards the prime minister's residence, he saw a white-haired old man sitting on an armchair. He sent everyone away, but there were 2 different auras on his body. Lin Yu has already concealed his aura, making it difficult for others to detect him. As Wang Xiang rotated the wooden armchair, the signboard began to rumble. Gradually, a secret chamber appeared up ahead. It was a dazzling sight. Wang Xiang slowly walked into the cave. Lin Yu hid his aura and followed him in. When Lin Yu reached the depths, Wang Xiang was already sitting on the dragon throne, drinking alone in a wine cup made of human heads. "It's about time to launch a mutiny," Wang Xiang said slowly. He looked at the king's robe hanging in front of him, which was embroidered with a vigorous true dragon. Wang Xiang had built this stone chamber for a long time, and he would come here every day to take a look. After all these years, Wang Xiang's power in the Fu Ho country had long been unimaginable. By now, Lin Yu had almost figured out who had entrusted him with this task. Lin Yu was still hiding in the dark. Just as Wang Xiang stood up, Lin Yu, who was close to him, suddenly launched an attack. He didn't hesitate at all, and he didn't even say a word. As the sword light flashed, Lin Yu condensed his strongest killing move. The method of the 8 tribes of Great Void completely turned this place into darkness. What happened? Wang Xiang was shocked. He didn't expect that someone would dare to make a move in his mansion. Left and right guardians, 2 green lights, one black and one white, appeared in Wang Xiang's sleeves exuding a powerful aura. However, the two of them found it hard to stop Lin Yu's advance. Puff, in an instant, the left and right guardians were cut in half. Now, if one wasn't a seven-step expert, it would be difficult to effectively suppress Lin Yu. There was no surprise at all. The left and right guardians were directly killed by Lin Yu. Their bones were ground to dust. Universe fire erupted at this moment. Universe fire was even more blazing in this world, and it could erupt with even more power. The two guardians were still breathing, but at this moment, they were directly burned to dust, leaving only two ashes on the ground. Immediately after, Lin Yu condensed a flying sword again and directly cut off Wang Xiang's head. Everything happened in a single breath, in the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint. No one could react. Wang Xiang didn't expect that someone would dare to sneak into his mansion to assassinate him. But at this moment, Lin Yu had a bad premonition. "We've fallen into a trap," Lin Yu said calmly. The method of the 8 tribes of Great Void had not been completely eliminated. Lin Yu used a restriction to seal this place. The person he killed just now was not Wang Xiang, but someone else. It was Wang Xiang's puppet. Lin Yu disappeared from the stone room. But since he had already made a move, Lin Yu had no intention of stopping. He used the ancient word to deduce Wang Xiang's true location. His figure suddenly disappeared on the spot. It wasn't until Lin Yu found Wang Xiang's true location that news came from the stone room. It was a beautiful place with many heavenly treasures. It was simply a paradise in the world. It was hard to imagine how many treasures Wang Xiang had over the years. Oh no, the left and right guardians have been killed, and Wang Xiang's puppet is also dead. At this moment, a person who looked like an alchemist beside him, wearing a square scarf on his head, looked shocked. Wang Xiang's expression changed drastically, just as they were about to retreat. A figure that resembled a god of death had already appeared here. It was Lin Yu. "Who are you?" Wang Xiang asked in surprise. "It's someone from the divine court." The alchemist was extremely shocked. However, there was a trace of cunning in the depths of his eyes, as if he had been prepared for Lin Yu's arrival. The hand behind his back slowly made a gesture. Lin Yu naturally saw it clearly. His powerful divine thought had already allowed him to investigate all the methods before he entered this place. He was very calm. As long as he killed, he would not leave any flaws. Puff! Lin Yu stretched out his finger, and the alchemist's arm that was making a gesture was instantly cut off. Blood dripped. The alchemist's forehead was full of cold sweat, and he was enduring great pain. At the same time, he was also filled with despair. The people from the divine court had come here. Wang Xiang's purpose had probably been exposed. Moreover, Lin Yu had already seen through his means, and he could not even resist. Everything happened too quickly. Almost as soon as Wang Xiang's puppet was killed, Lin Yu had already arrived here. Crossing a few miles in such a short time, this kind of strength was probably unimaginable. "Who sent you here?" The white-haired Wang Xiang naturally felt a strong fear from Lin Yu's strength. At this time, he asked with fear. However, he did not get a reply from Lin Yu. Finally, Wang Xiang's body appeared on the ground. Lin Yu took away all the things here, then returned to the town with Wang Xiang's body to report. Chapter 1427. In less than half a day, Sheng was truly shocked. When he saw Wang Xiang's corpse, Sheng sighed and said, "You seem to have many secrets." If Lin Yu hadn't plundered all the treasures in Wang Xiang's residence, he might have been even faster. It was just that Lin Yu didn't mention it. It was just that this speed was extremely shocking to Sheng. According to his estimation, Lin Yu might need half a month's time. He didn't expect that he would succeed in just half a day. "I was just lucky," Lin Yu replied. Lin Yu was an existence who was about to break through to the supreme realm. In this world, he was probably at the 10th step. Killing a person was a piece of cake for him. "If I had made a move that day, I might have died in your hands." Sheng smiled bitterly. He thought of Lin Yu's warning in the heaven-abandoning sect. Now, Sheng no longer felt that Lin Yu was being arrogant. He truly had such strength. Although this was Sheng being humble, being able to enter the divine court was enough to show how powerful Sheng was. An ordinary 7-step powerhouse was probably no match for him. However, Lin Yu wasn't invincible. After handing in the mission, Lin Yu received contribution points and exchanged them for what he needed from the Divine Court. Now, he had gathered all the main ingredients. It was time for Lin Yu to refine the next pill. He opened up a cave abode on a mountain peak on the side of the town. He stood in front of the alchemy furnace. He took out the monster core of the pangolin beast he had obtained and took out a few heavenly treasures. Most of them had a strong reincarnation aura. Lin Yu had obtained them from the Forbidden Grounds. However, there were a few types, such as the mysterious yellow root and the heavenly stargrass. He had exchanged them from the Divine Court. Saint Polarity Pill. It could allow a cultivator to break through to the Emperor realm. In other words, it corresponded to the 6th and 7th steps. Now, this was the highest grade pill that Lin Yu could refine with the resources in his hands. In Lin Yu's opinion, the Saint Polarity Elixir was enough for him to break through to the 7th step. It had been a few years since Lin Yu had left. If not for the fact that he had cultivated the Taoist scripture and did not have any periods of fatigue, he would not have been able to recover. Lin Yu would never be able to reach that level. Lin Yu had now thoroughly integrated the alchemy skills he had mastered. Now, he was comparable to the 7th grade alchemists in this world. Moreover, this was because his cultivation was restricted. Otherwise, Lin Yu would have been able to refine Tier 8 or even Tier 9 pills. His talent in alchemy was in no way inferior to his talent in cultivation. However, in order to increase his strength, he had temporarily put aside his alchemy skills. Lin Yu continued to throw herbs into the alchemy cauldron. A few days had passed, and the entire mountain was filled with a medicinal fragrance. Auspicious beasts and auspicious birds were all gathering here. Multicolored light appeared in this place. However, Lin Yu had already expected this. In order not to attract attention, he had already set up a formation here. This prevented too much commotion from occurring. Sheng, who was being taught by Crow, was also alarmed by Lin Yu's movement. He opened his eyes. That kid is concocting pills. Within the crow's scarlet eyes, 2 rays of light burst forth. Sheng was also surprised. He said, I didn't expect Lin Yu to know how to refine pills. Moreover, it seems like his attainments are very high. He's at least a 7th grade alchemist. Crow said with certainty, Lin Yu's potential. Sheng looked from afar. At this moment, a sense of frustration arose in his heart. He originally thought that his cultivation was slightly higher than Lin Yu's. Now, Lin Yu had mastered the art of alchemy and was already a 7th grade alchemist. His cultivation at the 7th step seemed unremarkable. Even in the Gochin ancient nation, 7th grade alchemists were rare. In a large sect, they would at least be a guest. They sat on endless wealth and status. With a single order, there would be countless experts willing to risk their lives for him. An alchemist of this level was enough to make many experts scramble for him. As expected of the legendary person prophesied by the Divine Court, Sheng said slowly. Lin Yu's identity was very special. After the Divine Court's first Divine Master left, he left behind a prophecy. It said that in this world, there was a person who could lead the Divine Court into the endless domain once again. Once again, they would step into unparalleled power. In Sheng's opinion, Lin Yu definitely had the potential to do so. However, Crow frowned at this moment and said faintly, since ancient times, geniuses like him were not rare. If we want the Divine Court to regain its glory, I'm afraid there's still a long way to go. However, Crow's gaze was deep. He slowly closed his eyes, and no one knew what he was thinking about. He seemed to be reminiscing. Crow had lived for a long time and had once followed the Divine Court's first Divine Court's master. However, in the end, he inexplicably fell into a deep sleep. Only now did he wake up. No one knew what had happened. Crow might have forgotten some of his memories because he had been in a deep sleep for too long. He had lost part of his memories. However, in Crow's eyes, the talent that Lin Yu was displaying was still not at a shocking level. It was enough to show how high his standards were. At this moment, Lin Yu had finished refining the Saint Elixir. 3 simple and round elixirs appeared in his hand. There were mysterious elixir patterns on them. The grade was very high. They were almost flawless elixirs. Lin Yu looked at the elixirs in his hand calmly and said slowly, "Now I just need to settle down and I could try to break through to the 7th step." In this world, Lin Yu's progress was terrifying. If word got out that he had reached the 7th step in 1 or 2 years, it would be enough to shock everyone. It was unbelievable. However, this had to do with the fact that Lin Yu had once reached the highest critical point. His settling down was very deep. Although he had never come into contact with the methods of this world, he could quickly grasp the things that he needed to pay attention to in each realm. Lin Yu put away the elixirs. Now he was only missing the settling down of the 6th step. As long as he slowly refined the power of the powerhouse that looked like Ancestor Lu in his body, Lin Yu would not need long to reach the peak of the 6th step. According to Lin Yu's expectations, the power of the powerhouse in his body was enough for Lin Yu to cultivate to the peak of the 8th step. This power was definitely boundless. If Lin Yu did not have the God King's token, he might not be able to suppress this power and would explode and die. Lin Yu walked out of the cave abode that he had opened up. At this moment, he could see that the cave abode was surrounded by auspicious beasts and auspicious birds. At this moment, they were crawling on the ground, absorbing the medicinal power that overflowed from the elixirs. Just a little bit of medicinal power was enough to benefit them greatly. At this moment, there were already strange beasts and signs of people breaking through. Lin Yu did not care about these. The ranks of these strange beasts were too low. Although some of them had medicinal power, they were not very useful to Lin Yu now. Lin Yu came to the town. This place was still desolate. Sheng lived in a run-down Taoist temple. At this moment, when he saw Lin Yu coming, he could not help but smile and say, "I didn't expect you to be an alchemist." "My skills are not up to par," Lin Yu said. If a 7th grade alchemist is considered a mediocre alchemist, I'm afraid that no one in the Gaotian ancient country would dare to say that they are proficient in alchemy, Sheng said. However, what he was most concerned about was what kind of elixir Lin Yu had concocted. According to Crow's description, it had reached the 7th rank. And now, Sheng was also at the 7th grade. He was thinking about the few types of elixirs that Lin Yu could concoct that were useful to him. "Lin Yu, I have a request. Can you concoct a type of elixir for me? Here are the ingredients and the prescription." Sheng said with a pleading tone, "Of course, I know the rules of alchemists. Just name a price, and I will try my best to satisfy you." "Is it a prescription?" Lin Yu asked curiously. Prescription was the foundation of an alchemist. Normally, very few people would know about it. Chapter 1428. As long as it's within my ability, there's no problem, Lin Yu said. "I can only concoct high-grade 7th grade pills at most." "That's more than enough." Sheng was pleasantly surprised. Lin Yu's words meant that he agreed. Now that Sheng's cultivation had reached a bottleneck, he needed this pill to break the deadlock. This is the pill recipe and the treasure. There's a total of 2 sets. Take them both, Sheng said. There was a chance of failure in concocting pills. Especially the higher the grade of the pill, the higher the chance of failure. However, Sheng had only collected 2 sets so far. He was still a little worried. He was afraid that the 2 sets were not enough. If he failed, the loss would outweigh the gain. He had asked the Alchemy Pavilion of the Gaotian ancient country. More than one 8th grade alchemist said that he had to prepare at least 3 sets of this pill, and the chance of failure was very high. This made Sheng flinch. He looked at Lin Yu with a worried expression. However, he had rarely heard words of praise from Crow's mouth. At this moment, his cultivation had reached a bottleneck. His cultivation in the past few days was in vain. Therefore, he chose to try it on Lin Yu. If it didn't work, he would think of a way to gather the herbs. 2 sets are more than enough, Lin Yu said. No matter how difficult it was to concoct a 7th grade pill, it was not a problem for Lin Yu. Not to mention that his chance of success was a rare 90%. Even if he failed, he could use the power of the God King's decree to salvage the situation. Therefore, Lin Yu accepted both sets. Since this elixir was useful for increasing one's cultivation level, Lin Yu thought that it might be useful for him as well. The remaining portion was Lin Yu's reward for his hard work. Therefore, Lin Yu did not ask Sheng for anything else. In order to gather these 2 sets of herbs, Sheng had spent almost all of his contribution points. Lin Yu did not add insult to injury. "I'll give you the pill in 3 days," Lin Yu said. However, after thinking for a moment, he asked, "Are there any missions now?" Although Lin Yu was not worried about breaking through to the 7th step, Lin Yu had already witnessed the power of the divine court when he had first exchanged for medicinal herbs. Just the collection and foundation of this branch had already reached an astonishing level. There are even some divine items that Lin Yu had never seen before. Without a doubt, this would be of great use to the utmost realms. Lin Yu thought about the stone sword that had been lying dormant in his body. Even though it was a supreme artifact, if there was a way to repair it in this world and restore it to the level of a grand mist artifact, why not? Therefore, contribution points were also very important. These tasks have been handed over to other cultivators. If anyone wants to ask the Divine Court for help, they will come here and be distributed in half a month, Sheng said with embarrassment. Lin Yu was slightly regretful, but he did not show any anxiety. Through the conversation with Sheng, Lin Yu thought of a way to quickly accumulate divine items. That was to sell the pills that he had refined. Thinking of this, Lin Yu was already prepared to do so. At that time in the Heaven-Leaving sect, he still had grade 4 and grade 5 pills that he had not used. Perhaps he could use these pills to accumulate something for his breakthrough in the future. However, Lin Yu was not anxious about this. Grade 4 and grade 5 pills were not very valuable. To be precise, even if they could be exchanged for divine items, they might not be of much use to him now. "Then, I'll help you refine the pills first." Lin Yu made a decision immediately. Lin Yu entered the cave again. However, Sheng followed him now. "It's taboo to be disturbed when refining pills," Lin Yu said. "I know this rule. I'll guard outside the cave to protect you." Sheng smiled. Although he had never revealed his identity or his true appearance, Lin Yu also felt that although Sheng's cultivation was strong, he was easy to get along with. He was relatively easygoing. Lin Yu did not refuse. It was not that Lin Yu really did not want to be disturbed, but he did not want to expose the Divine King's badge. Or it was inevitable that he would feel unbalanced if Sheng saw that he had refined 1 set of pills. Lin Yu ignited the alchemy fire again. However, he was not using the ordinary flame in his body now, but the universe flame. This flame was extremely terrifying. Even though Sheng was outside the cave, he could feel the heat. "It seems that Lin Yu once obtained a great fortune," Sheng said with a hint of surprise. Although he was well-versed in alchemy, he knew a little about the rumors in the alchemy world. Some high-level alchemists would look for special flames between heaven and earth to increase the refinement of herbs or to improve the grade of pills. Sheng had also observed some high-level alchemists who had special flames refining pills, but he did not feel it as deeply as he did now. Even he felt a strong threat from the universe flame that Lin Yu used. "I'm afraid this is not as simple as a special flame." Sheng frowned as time passed. For alchemists, special flames were rare divine items. For cultivators, it was a killing weapon. Sheng did not know what the flame that Lin Yu was using was. However, if he tried to sense it, he felt like he had fallen into the universe and was about to be refined. In the end, Sheng shook his head helplessly. Lin Yu's combat strength was probably above his. Just by using this mysterious flame, it was likely that he would not be able to endure it. In the blink of an eye, 2 days passed. Suddenly, lightning could be seen gathering in the sky. This was the phenomenon that would occur when a very high-grade medicinal pill was about to be formed. Some pills whose effects were too heaven-defying would suffer the jealousy of the heavens, which was the legendary pill tribulation. Sheng was excited. However, he was not overjoyed and lost his judgment. With a wave of his black robe, 4 large banners with golden patterns appeared. They seemed to have the power to imprison everything. At this time, they shot out in all directions. They sealed off an area of 10 miles with the mountain as the center. At this time, the pill tribulation had formed. Wind and clouds gathered. Boom! The lightning was like a giant snake that was thousands of feet long, directly cutting through the sky. Lin Yu's cave residence was blasted into smithereens. Lin Yu's figure appeared. Facing the pill tribulation, he did not have the slightest fear. "You leave first," Lin Yu said to Sheng. At this time, Lin Yu raised his hand and directly hit a few seals on the pill furnace to prevent the pill from escaping. A pill of this grade was refined from rare heavenly and earthly treasures in the world. It was equivalent to the beauty of heaven and earth, and after being refined by humans, it already possessed a simple spiritual intelligence. Now that the pill sensed the lightning tribulation, it wanted to escape. If one wanted the pill to be perfect, it was necessary to go through the lightning tribulation. Lin Yu directly took out the pill furnace. The pill furnace was brought out by him from the heaven-abandoning sect. As the lightning tribulation struck, the pill furnace instantly turned into molten iron and splashed in all directions, burning through the ground and the cliff. The molten iron could not get close to Lin Yu's body. At this time, there was a layer of hazy light on his body. Even if the lightning tribulation descended, it could not invade his body. This was the power of the ancient characters. Long ago, Lin Yu had already mastered 9 ancient characters. However, it was difficult for him to use all of his power now. He could only turn into a layer of hazy halo to resist powerful attacks. Even though the halo looked very weak, it would probably take an 8-step expert 3 moves to break it. And now, the lightning tribulation of 7th grade pill could not hurt Lin Yu. Chapter 1429. Sheng, who was watching from the side, was extremely shocked. He didn't know what defensive means Lin Yu had used to be able to withstand the lightning tribulation that even he was shocked by. There were more and more mysteries surrounding Lin Yu. However, the higher-ups of the Divine Court didn't tell Lin Yu about his background. At Sheng's level, he didn't have access to it. When Lin Yu went to complete the task, Sheng was only responsible for contacting the leader of the Divine Court and letting Crow know about it. Sheng looked at Lin Yu's figure in the distance and muttered to himself, "Where are you from?" The divine abilities and spells that Lin Yu had displayed were something that he had never seen before. At this moment, Sheng began to have doubts in his heart. The pill tribulation lasted for 6 hours and gradually began to weaken. The vast pill light directly dispersed the thunderclouds. The 3 pills finally revealed their true appearance. They had already transformed into 3 young spirits, and were about to flee while babbling and making noises. However, Lin Yu was already prepared. At this moment, he directly attacked with great strength. At this time, the 3 pills still wanted to break free, but it was already too late. The 3 pills turned into their original forms, with the luster of jade. The true spirit pill done. Sheng muttered to himself. At this moment, he was extremely excited. He didn't expect Lin Yu to succeed so easily. The true spirit pill could break through one's own bottleneck, and at the same time, it nurtured pure power. It was very useful for cultivators, especially because Sheng broke through too quickly in the early stage, causing his own bottleneck to the 7th step. At this time, with the true spirit pill, he didn't have to worry about this problem. After all the aura dissipated, Lin Yu took out 3 pills that were still warm, came in front of Sheng, and handed the pills to him. "Only one. I know, this is the rule of the alchemy world," Sheng said at this time, forthright. 1 set of herbs, 3 pills. It was extremely rare for an 8th grade alchemist. Sheng didn't hesitate. The most important thing for him now was to break through his own bottleneck. Although the true spirit pill was precious, Sheng had already seen Lin Yu's potential. In the years to come, Sheng would definitely have to ask Lin Yu for help. Therefore, taking out 2 true spirit pills was worth it for Sheng. Lin Yu didn't refuse. "Okay, I'll take it." The true spirit pill was a 7th grade pill. For special people, it had surpassed the 8th grade pill. Being able to break through bottlenecks was of great use to 8-step cultivators. Lin Yu could use these 2 pills to exchange for his own needs. "I need to go to King's City." Lin Yu said, "I'll be back in half a month." He wanted to find out more about elixirs in the current royal city. Sheng loved the true spirit pill so much that he could not bear to part with it. But in order to prevent the medicinal properties from dissipating, he still put it away in the jade bottle. After carefully putting away the pills, Sheng nodded and said, "The Divine Court doesn't have too many restrictions on the people in the organization. It's fine as long as we can contact each other when the time comes." Sheng didn't ask too much about what Lin Yu wanted to do. Everyone had their secrets. In this regard, Sheng did a good job. "After I refine these true spirit pills, I'll come and find you," Sheng said. The Divine Court also had its own forces in the royal city. Sheng gave Lin Yu a token. With this token, it will be much more convenient for him to move around royal city. Lin Yu looked at the token made of black gold, which had a musky fragrance. He nodded and didn't refuse. After everything was done, Sheng went into seclusion. Crow seemed to be unable to leave this area. Although he also wanted to go to the royal city with Lin Yu, in the end, he could only sigh regretfully. Lin Yu came to the royal city again. Obviously, the news of Wang Xiang's death had spread. For a moment, everyone was in a state of panic. The streets were heavily guarded, checking everyone who entered and left the city. Because Sheng had already prepared Lin Yu's identity, he didn't encounter too many obstacles and entered the city easily. Lin Yu came to a restaurant. There were many cultivators here. Because the North Star ancient nation was founded by force, the vassal states under it all advocated cultivation. There were many sects or organizations that could teach cultivation. After entering the royal city, cultivators could be seen everywhere. Lin Yu found a seat by the window and sat down. However, when Lin Yu sat down, the people around him revealed strange looks. At this moment, the waiter also arrived. "Sir, would you like to change seats?" The waiter looked troubled and said, "Thank you for your understanding." Lin Yu stood up. He wasn't afraid of anything, but he didn't want to make things difficult for the waiter. He could see that the manager hated the waiter and wanted to skin him alive. However, just as Lin Yu was about to change seats, a voice came out. "Who are you to sit in my seat?" At this moment, a young man in a brocade robe came. He was holding a beautiful woman in a thin veil in his arms. His eyes were full of pride. However, perhaps because of excessive indulgence, there were deep dark circles around his eyes. His face was pale, as if he was terminally ill. His cultivation had reached the 5th step. In the entire royal city, he was an expert. However, the aura on his body was very weak, as if it was piled up by pills. "Your Highness, this guest doesn't know that this is your exclusive seat. He has already left." The waiter quickly bowed and explained, "Do you have a right to speak here?" A crisp slap sent the waiter out of the restaurant and down the stairs. Blood flowed from his mouth and nose. He looked like he was half dead. The man pulled out the woman's underwear and wiped his hands seriously. His eyes were filled with disdain and disdain. "You dirty my hands, you reckless thing." At this moment, he looked at Lin Yu and said coldly, "Lick the chair you sat on." At this moment, the manager was so scared that he didn't dare to step forward. Some people even left their seats. The man was the 7th son of Fu Ho. In the royal city, he was notorious. Because of his mother's love, no one dared to provoke him. "I was scolded by my father. I'm full of anger. I wanted to eat something and then find you to vent my anger." The 7th prince played with the woman in his arms and said coldly, "Now, there's an appetizer." He looked at Lin Yu playfully. Everyone couldn't bear it, and their eyes were filled with sympathy. They all thought that Lin Yu couldn't escape this calamity. The 7th prince was famous for being ruthless. Even if he licked the chair clean, he wouldn't let Lin Yu go. "You're very confident," Lin Yu said indifferently. He faced the 7th prince's ruthless eyes and was very indifferent. "What did I say? Can't you hear me?" The 7th prince was furious. "What are you, deaf?" Pa, a crisp sound. But it wasn't Lin Yu who was hit. It was the 7th prince who flew out of the restaurant and fell heavily on the ground. "This is the money for destroying the restaurant." Lin Yu casually threw a bag of silver to the manager. The scene in front of them frightened everyone. They were all dumbfounded. They didn't expect Lin Yu to be so strong. Doesn't this person know the 7th prince? Someone was stunned. Although looking at the 7th prince lying on the street like a dog eating poop, they began to worry about Lin Yu at the same time. Chapter 1430. In Monarch City, no one dared to treat the royal family like this. In the Gauchian ancient country, the royal family was the most respected. Even the sects that cultivated were considered as vassals. This was very different from other places. When they saw Lin Yu's clothes, they knew that Lin Yu did not come from a sect or the royal family. He was probably just a rogue cultivator. But now he dared to do this. Obviously, he had violated a great taboo. How dare you hit me? Even my father has never hit me like this. The seventh prince staggered to his feet. He was furious. At this moment, he stood up and looked at Lin Yu, who was looking at him coldly. But when he pointed at Lin Yu's cold gaze made him feel as if he had fallen into the nine-nether abyss. His heart palpitated. Extreme fear surged into his heart. The seventh prince's next words were stuck in his throat. He could not say anything for a moment. But this only lasted for a moment. The seventh prince's saber appeared in his hand. There were still bloodstains on it that had not dried up. This was left behind by Marquis Fu when he fought on the battlefield and killed countless enemies. There were 2 words on it: protect the country. It was scarlet. It shook everyone's heart. Before the seventh prince could speak again, Lin Yu had already appeared in front of the seventh prince. Slap. Then there was another slap. The seventh prince did not have time to react. He was sent flying. People like you don't deserve to hold this saber, Lin Yu said calmly. It was as if he was a senior teaching a junior lesson. Lin Yu was merciless. The seventh prince stood up and slapped him. After a few slaps, the seventh prince lost his temper. The beautiful lady that he was hugging was stunned. She looked through the hole and saw the scene on the street. She was obviously scared out of her wits. The shopkeeper did not dare to pick up the money that Lin Yu gave him. If he were to settle the score later, everyone in the restaurant would be punished. Lin Yu slapped the seventh prince more than 10 times. In the end, the seventh prince no longer dared to get up. He could only howl on the ground. Personal guards, where the hell did you go? Seeing the seventh prince being beaten up, no one stepped forward to stop him. Firstly, he admired Lin Yu's courage and terrifying strength. Secondly, he wanted to see the appearance of the seventh prince being taught a lesson. The seventh prince was wailing on the ground. Every time he got up, he would be slapped. In the end, his face was swollen like a pig's head. His mouth and nose were bleeding, and his teeth were falling out. Lin Yu was still as indifferent as ever. Have you experienced the pain of others? Lin Yu stood in front of the seventh prince and looked down at the severely injured seventh prince. But this was far less than Little Fool's injuries. Little Fool was just an ordinary person. After being slapped by a fifth-step cultivator, he was already half dead. Lin Yu did not use his cultivation. He only used the strength of his physical body to educate the seventh prince. I want you to die a horrible death. I want her bones and tendons pulled out. I want you to light up the sky lantern for 100 years. The seventh prince said viciously. Bang! He kicked out. The seventh prince flew dozens of feet away. The sound of his ribs breaking could be clearly heard. The seventh prince did not get up. Lin Yu directly kicked him. The street vendors dodged. Their carts were flipped over. It was a mess. However, Lin Yu still gave some money to the innocent vendors who were robbed. Lin Yu's figure was like a ghost. When the seventh prince hit the pillar, he barely stabilized his body. Lin Yu was already in front of him. Before the seventh prince could speak, he kicked him again. If this goes on, I'm afraid someone will die. Someone whispered. Their eyes were filled with worry. However, someone immediately said, since the young man has already made a move, he's not afraid of this. A butcher saw the coldness in Lin Yu's eyes. It was definitely not an act. It was like a butcher who had killed pigs for decades. He no longer had the slightest bit of mercy when facing a live pig. Faced with the butcher's analogy, the crowd felt that it was inappropriate and immediately covered his mouth. The seventh prince could only whimper in a low voice now. He could not even spit out a word. Just as Lin Yu kicked the seventh prince for the last time, a soldier riding a powerful mutated beast with dense scales on his body came to the street. They sensed the commotion here. What are you all doing? A middle-aged man who looked like a commander came down from the back of the mutated beast. His tone was filled with endless majesty. General Chung, someone exclaimed when they saw the identity of the person who came. They were all extremely shocked. General Chung had followed Marquis Fu to the border back then and was known for his ruthlessness. That young man is in trouble, someone whispered. At this moment, the seventh prince, who was no longer in human form, was kicked to the foot of the mutated beast by Lin Yu. General Chung also saw the person who was covered in blood. It was the seventh prince. His eyes gradually became cold. How dare you hurt His Highness the seventh prince? General Chung berated. The power of his cultivation directly formed a strong wind and swept out. However, to Lin Yu, this was not much of a pressure. It only blew the corner of his clothes and black hair. Everyone was retreating, unable to withstand this force. Even a mutated beast knelt on the ground and kept wailing. Uncle Chung, save me. Kill that person. The seventh prince used the last of his strength and said to General Chung. After saying that, he fainted. Capture the offender. If he resists, kill him on the spot. General Chung looked at the unconscious seventh prince and said coldly. Lin Yu looked at General Chung indifferently. Is this how your superiors do things? Lin Yu looked at General Chung and the people surrounding him and said calmly. Some cultivators saw Lin Yu and could not help but be shocked. General Chung is an existence of the seventh step. What is this young man relying on? Even at this time, he is neither servile nor overbearing. He even dares to question him. Someone could not help but exclaim. General Chung looked at Lin Yu and said, Are you qualified to question me? Qi. A beam of sword qi appeared out of nowhere. It directly cut off a strand of General Cheng's hair, and a bloody scar appeared on his cheek. How dare you hurt General Chung? The soldiers surrounding Lin Yu saw that General Chung was injured and rushed forward in anger. They wanted to cut Lin Yu into pieces and chop him into minced meat. Back down. You are no match for him. General Cheng's expression gradually became serious. He had been on the battlefield for many years and naturally had sharp senses. Even if Lin Yu did not reveal his cultivation, he was definitely not an ordinary cultivator to be able to cut off his hair at such speed. May I know which sect you are from? General Chung withdrew his contemptuous attitude and asked seriously. With such a cultivation, he was probably not as simple as a rogue cultivator. Do you think you are qualified to question me? Lin Yu replied indifferently. He had already sensed that the person in charge of receiving Lin Yu from the divine court had arrived. Judging from his aura, he was even stronger than Sheng's cultivation. The divine court had never accepted weaklings. Do you know where this is? General Chung asked coldly in the face of Lin Yu's arrogance. On the battlefield, he was the god of war who terrified his enemies. Now, he was being looked down upon in Monarch City. General Chung, you are really not qualified. At this moment, an old man with two boys beside him arrived at the scene, riding a huge book. Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion. Someone recognized the old man. Pavilion Master, what is the meaning of this? General Chung frowned when he saw the Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion. He naturally knew of the Pavilion Master's powerful background. Are you sure you want to say it here? Can you bear the price? The Pavilion Master said faintly. Chapter 1431. Go to Hu Ho and explain it clearly. It's good for you and that prince, the Pavilion Master said. Some cultivators had heard that the Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion was very powerful. Even Hu Ho had to call him teacher. They didn't expect that the Pavilion Master would come for an unknown young man. Okay. General Chung frowned and said, Take His Highness away. Facing the Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion, General Chung didn't dare to have any objections. He only ordered his subordinates and nodded. She watched as General Chung carried the unconscious seventh prince away. The Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion looked at Lin Yu and nodded. You must be the person appointed by the Divine Master. Don't worry, I'm here. Nothing will happen. The Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion had clearly deduced what had happened here. At this moment, he said to Lin Yu. Lin Yu nodded. They boarded the Pavilion Master's Dharma artifact. Not long after, they arrived at the Imperial Palace in the center of the royal city. The Imperial Palace was magnificent. There were a total of 999 steps of white marble stairs. Below them was the corpse of a python that was about to transform into a dragon. It carried a powerful pressure. However, Lin Yu and the others didn't pass by there. Instead, they went directly to the Imperial Palace. At this moment, in the main hall of the Imperial Palace, he was wearing a python robe and a jade crown. He was tall and sturdy, and he had an aura of being in a high position for a long time. When he saw Lin Yu and the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion, he turned around and said, "Wake him up." Fu Ho's eyes were filled with anger. General Cheng woke the seventh prince up with a pill. General Cheng sighed. He knew that the seventh prince might be crippled today. He could have provoked anyone, but he had to find someone from the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion. "Pavilion Master, please take a seat." Fu Ho stretched out his hand. The Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion sat on the chair leisurely. "How should I address you?" "Please take a seat," he said to Lin Yu. Someone who could make the Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion personally welcome must have a high status in the Divine Court. As a marquis, Fu Ho was naturally able to see all of this. Lin Yu sat next to the Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion. Even when facing Fu Ho, who was at the 8th step, he was still really calm. At this moment, it was unknown how the 7th prince's mother found out about the 7th prince's encounter and came to the Imperial Palace. With her face full of tears, she saw the 7th prince, who was almost beaten into a cripple. "My son, who is it? Who beat you up like this?" "I will definitely." The 7th prince's mother did not finish her words. Marquis Hu frowned and slapped the princess consort. Half of her face was swollen. Now, the Pavilion Lord of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion was here. If they were to allow the 7th prince's mother to act impudently here, they would be completely offending the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion. Others might not know, but Hu Ho was very clear. The reason why he was able to become a noble of the North Star Ancient Nation was largely because of the Divine Court's help. At the same time, he also knew how powerful the Divine Court was. He could probably overturn the entire Gauchan Ancient Nation. "It's you who spoiled him and caused him to make a big mistake," Hu Ho said coldly. "Men, throw Princess Consort Ming into the cold palace." Someone directly dragged Princess Consort Ming out of the Imperial Palace. "My lord, I'm your favorite consort. You can't do this to me," Princess Consort Ming begged bitterly. However, Hu Ho was unmoved. He had been busy with government affairs and had turned a blind eye to the mistakes made by the 7th prince. He had never thought that he would make such a big mistake at this time. He remembered that he had just reprimanded the 7th prince today. He did not expect that not long after, he would provoke people from the Divine Court. Moreover, from the attitude of the Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion, this person's position in the organization was not low. This undoubtedly caused Hu Ho to become nervous. If he angered this person, the entire Fu Ho country would not be able to bear his anger. This was not a joke. The previous vassal state was a good example. "Where is this, father?" The 7th prince slowly woke up. He endured the intense pain. He was the first to see his father. He did not realize the seriousness of the problem at all. When he saw General Cheng, he immediately shouted, "Uncle Cheng, did you capture that person and cripple him?" "Your Highness, shut up." General Cheng was also covered in cold sweat. Fu Ho's favorite princess, Consort Ming, who was the 7th prince's mother, had already been thrown into the cold palace because of this matter. Now, the 7th prince was still mentioning this matter. Was he looking for death? "Speak, what did you do?" Fu Ho's aura directly lifted the 7th prince up and made him kneel on the ground. The 7th prince was scared silly by Fu Ho in front of him. He had never seen his father treat him so harshly. "Father," the 7th prince wanted to admit his mistake. In the past, when he committed a crime, he would admit defeat and beat around the bush. At this moment, he was still trying to use this method. "Did I ask you anything else?" Fu Ho stared over. The pressure of an 8th-step expert directly broke a few of the 7th prince's bones. However, Fu Ho's aura passed through. Even though the 7th prince was in pain, he still didn't faint. "Father, today I just had a conflict with an unknown thing," the 7th prince said. How dare you? Fu Ho was furious. A shout sent the seventh prince flying hundreds of feet away. Who knew how many of his bones were broken? His organs were all shifted, and it seemed like he was about to die. Sir, please make a decision. Fu Ho came in front of Lin Yu and pointed at the seventh prince, who was now a pile of mud, and said seriously. Now, he couldn't care less about his identity as a king. Lin Yu's identity was too shocking. His Fu Ho country definitely couldn't take it. You can teach him, Lin Yu said calmly. With Lin Yu's eyes, he naturally knew that Fu Ho was protecting his son's life. He'd beat the seventh prince up like that, and there was no way he could do anything. If Lin Yu attacked, he would at most kill him. The worst result would be that Lin Yu killed the seventh prince, and everything would be over. However, he knew that with Lin Yu's identity, he wouldn't be so calculated with the prince. That was the truth. After hearing Lin Yu's reply, Fu Ho's expression didn't change, and one couldn't see what he was thinking. Today, sir, you came to Fu Ho country, and I didn't expect my unfilial son to offend you. I apologize to you. Fu Ho bowed. Drag him down. Once his body is healed, send him to the border and never return to the imperial city. Fu Ho said directly. At this moment, he looked towards General Cheng. His eyes were filled with helplessness. General Cheng knew what was going on and immediately knelt on the ground. I am in the wrong, and I am willing to be punished. I will remove your position and send you to the border. Fu Ho sighed. General Cheng was his left and right hand. During the war, General Cheng saved Fu Ho's life. When he saw that General Cheng had suffered such a calamity because of his son, his eyes were filled with unbearable pain. Chapter 1432. Yes, Your Majesty. General Cheng took off his helmet with tassels, and a few strands of his messy hair fell down. He didn't show the slightest bit of unwillingness to accept his punishment. He just knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times, then walked out of the imperial palace alone. Sir, are you satisfied with this punishment? Lord Hu asked Lin Yu. Lin Yu nodded and said, General Cheng has fought alongside you for many years, and your son calls him uncle. It's not wrong for him to protect his son today. However, I have nothing to say about you sending General Cheng to the border to protect the seventh prince. Lin Yu had already seen through everything and said lightly. Lord Hu's expression changed. Obviously, he had underestimated Lin Yu's temperament. However, Lin Yu did not say anything else. It could be said that he did not care about this matter in the first place. The pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion smiled and did not say anything about Lord Hu's punishment. Marquis Hu already knew that the seventh prince had committed countless crimes in Royal City. However, he had met a tough opponent today and failed to escape the calamity. Why don't you stay in Royal City for a few more days? Lord Hu invited. He was very magnanimous and did not hold a grudge against Lin Yu because of his son. Lord Hu was ambitious and would not affect the overall situation because of a small matter. Perhaps he already knew about Wang Xiang's betrayal. He should also know that Yi Futian had used the God's Court to kill Wang Xiang. Soon, the major forces of the North Star Ancient Kingdom will be here to hold an auction. I think you should be interested, said the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion. This was also one of the purposes of Lin Yu's trip. It was to exchange for some divine items. Lin Yu nodded and said, I'll stay here for a few more days. Sheng said that he would come to Royal City in a few days. During these few days, Lin Yu could refine the power in his body. He wanted to improve his cultivation. Lord Hu personally arranged a residence for Lin Yu. It was not known how the news had spread to the Royal City, but for a moment, there was an uproar. Unexpectedly, there was an official from the Royal City who personally came to the inn to bring some holy medicine for the waiter. He even seemed apologetic. This caused everyone to be incomparably shocked. They were all guessing Lin Yu's identity. In recent days, the seventh prince was nowhere to be seen. Some people had already guessed something. Perhaps the seventh prince had already been robbed. Otherwise, the royal officials would not have come to the inn in person to pay for the seventh prince's mistake. This was naturally Fu Ho's intention. He wouldn't care about the life and death of a commoner. It was all to curry favor with Lin Yu and win over people's hearts. Now, there's finally one less tumor in Monarch City. After a few days, Wang Chung issued an order that the seventh prince would be sent to the border and would never be allowed to set foot in Wang Chung again. Everyone sighed. The seventh prince had been doing evil for decades, and now he was finally getting his retribution. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. The forces within the imperial capital of the Gauchan ancient country had arrived at the royal city. Among them, there were a few vassal states nearby. They had also heard the news and came over. This was a grand event that was held once every 10 years. The Gauchan ancient country was a major force in the imperial capital. They had a strong background, and their residence was connected to the outside world. The 5 eastern vassal states attached great importance to this event and sent special envoys here. Moreover, the items auctioned by the major forces were also very tempting. There were divine items required for the 10th step in the residence. There were also relics brought from the outside world of the Gauchan ancient country. Each of these items had a great origin. Even the marquises would covet them. However, the major forces had their own rules. The marquises could not participate in the auction. Instead, they brought the items that the marquises needed and could use them to exchange. This auction was open to rogue cultivators and some sects and forces in the Gauchan ancient country to ensure fairness and justice. In the past few days, many rogue cultivators and sects had already crossed several vassal states and arrived at the royal city of Huho. Even though the royal city occupied 1,000 miles, it could barely accommodate so many people. This was definitely going to be a grand event. Fuho had also prepared for a long time. Therefore, they specially built a new city in the royal city to accommodate the various forces. On this day, Lin Yu also left the royal palace. I'm old and have nothing to do. I'll go take a look as well. The pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion and Lin Yu arrived at the city that was specially built to accommodate forces. To be precise, the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion was only a force in Fuho. It was not ruled by Huho. Therefore, it was not a big problem for them to come here. Although it was called a city, it was only built with walls and buildings. It was even more prosperous than the royal city. People came and went in an endless stream. One could see powerful cultivators riding all kinds of strange beasts descending here. One faction was powerful and prosperous. Some large sects brought their disciples here to broaden their horizons. There were also powerful rogue cultivators who came and went alone, looking for a place to stay on the streets. Lin Yu looked at this scene calmly. The boy behind the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion had already found a place to stay. It was the most prosperous area in the city within the city. It was a building that overlooked the entire royal city. The building was antique in style and had a total of 30 floors. The maidservants inside were at least second-step cultivators and were beautiful enough to captivate birds and beasts. The name of the restaurant was Full Moon Restaurant. The words on the plaque were elegant and elegant. At the same time, they had a certain Tao charm and were written by a certain master. There are many powerful cultivators in Full Moon Restaurant, the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion reminded. He had already learned a lot before coming here. Lin Yu nodded. They arrived at the 20th floor. A maidservant brought them upstairs with graceful steps. There will be a banquet in Full Moon Restaurant in a while. At that time, you guys can come downstairs to drink and enjoy the dancing. If you need anything, you can tell me. In the end, the maidservant brought Lin Yu to a room. The maidservant said to Lin Yu while casting flirtatious glances at him. Lin Yu nodded. Thank you, but I don't need it. Naturally, he knew what she meant. After seeing Lin Yu's rejection, the maidservant's eyes revealed a dejected look. The maids were all carefully selected women from other regions. Their purpose in coming here was to find powerful Tao companions. The maidservant naturally knew the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion. When she saw Lin Yu walking with the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion, she had an idea. However, she was rejected by Lin Yu directly. If you have any instructions later, just ring the bell. Xiaoyao will be there immediately. The maidservant had a beaded curtain and looked hazy. Thank you, Lin Yu said. Lin Yu did not look at the maidservant from the beginning to the end. This caused a trace of disappointment to appear in the eyes of the maid who called herself Little Ya. Chapter 1433. After Lin Yu rested in his room for a while, the pavilion master of the Heaven's secret pavilion ordered a servant to come to Lin Yu's room. "Sir, the pavilion master has invited you to a banquet," the servant said respectfully. Lin Yu replied. Then, he came to the bottom of the Bright Moon Inn. The banquet was about to begin. By now, it was already full of people. The pavilion master of the Heaven's secret pavilion had been waiting for a long time. At this moment, the maidservant named Xiao saw Lin Yu coming. However, she was in the arms of another middle-aged man and was grumbling coquettishly to stop the man from touching her. Lin Yu brushed past them, but he did not even look at Xiao. "Sir Lin Yu, this way, please." When the servant saw that Lin Yu had come, he immediately led the way. The man seemed to have sensed that something was wrong with Xiao. When he saw Lin Yu's appearance, he said with a hint of jealousy, "Is that the pretty boy that you took a fancy to earlier on?" "Yes, pretty boy. Did you see that?" Even the pavilion master of the Heaven's secret pavilion of the Hu country has such an attitude, Xiao said. The dimness in her eyes gradually turned into hatred. She felt that she was pretty good looking. Furthermore, her cultivation base was at the 4th step. She was one of the best among all the maidservants. Now that she was being looked down upon by Lin Yu, she could not help but want to teach Lin Yu a lesson. Therefore, she tried to sow discord between the man and Lin Yu. However, Xiao did not know that among all the girls that Lin Yu had seen, there were more than a few who were prettier than her. He knew what Xiao was thinking. However, he was not interested. That was all. He did not look down on anyone. Perhaps it was just his personality. However, the way that the man looked at Lin Yu changed. He said, "Is that so?" There was a playful look in his eyes. In his opinion, Lin Yu did not look very old. In this world, the suppression of the Great Path was very serious. Even a powerhouse at the 10th step only had a lifespan of 10,000 years. It wasn't as if there weren't any spells or pills that could change one's appearance. However, the aura of time emanating from his body couldn't be concealed at all. The 6th step of cultivation is not bad. You could be considered outstanding, the man said slowly. Gradually, a playful look appeared in his eyes as he continued. However, what I like the most is to suppress outstanding talents. The man's background was extremely high. He was a deacon of the Heavenly Sword sect in the Gauchan royal capital. In the Sky Rapier sect, there were people who were at the peak of the 9th step and were about to break through to the 10th step. After reaching the 8th step, every realm was divided into 10 layers. Each layer was separated by a huge chasm that was difficult to cross. To be able to reach the peak of the 9th step in 10,000 years was already a rare existence in this world. As such, the Sky Sword sect was one of the few sects in the Gauchan ancient nation that was valued by the dynasty. At this moment, Lin Yu had already taken his seat. "I just did a divination. You seem to be in a bit of trouble," the pavilion lord said with a smile. "However, I'm getting more and more curious about you. This is because it's difficult for me to accurately divine something about you. I can only use everything around me to divine a trace of your future." The pavilion lord did not hide anything. He was worried that Lin Yu would not be able to divine his own future. At this moment, the ancient characters in Lin Yu's sea of consciousness released a strand of power. He looked at Xiao and the man. Coincidentally, the man was also looking at him. The few of them looked at each other. But to Lin Yu, these people were nothing more than jumping clowns, not worthy of being shown in public. The man was only at the 7th step. If he insisted on provoking Lin Yu did not recommend killing him. "It's those two," Lin Yu said. His words were calm, without the slightest ripple of emotion. The pavilion lord was a little surprised. "You know the art of divination as well?" The pavilion lord's divination art had a mysterious origin. It was said that it was passed down from the first godmaster. However, the pavilion lord did not know the exact details. Lin Yu nodded his head gently. "I know a little about it." The more he reached this stage, the more he could sense the might of the ancient characters. Even at the utmost state, these ancient characters were still extremely useful and had been wielded by many utmost beings in the past. However, the 9 ancient characters that Lin Yu had grasped were ones that no one had ever grasped before. It was just that before the utmost being fell, he had imprinted them in the ancient well. Thereafter, they were grasped by Lin Yu. After the Pavilion Lord said this, Lin Yu's expression was a little weird. There seemed to be a familiar aura coming from the Pavilion Lord. However, there seemed to be some sort of item with such an aura on him. Therefore, Lin Yu could not detect it. This had Lin Yu puzzled. Logically speaking, this should be his first time in this world. He had never come into contact with it before. Why did Lin Yu feel a sense of familiarity in this place? This was a mystery, and he had no idea. Perhaps this world already had a place of origin. Or perhaps powerful beings from the universe had arrived here before. Lin Yu thought to himself. That was the only explanation that made sense. The Pavilion Lord merely smiled faintly. Just as the banquet started, the dancers started dancing under the curtains. Their movements were graceful and even beautiful. One could not help but praise them. The Mingwen nunnery is truly worthy of being a famous sect in the entire Gaotian ancient nation. Not only is it very powerful, its disciples all have their own merits. If they were placed in other places, they would definitely be exceptional beauties. The Pavilion Lord drank a cup of wine with Lin Yu and said, "If this old man were a few hundred years younger, I would definitely find a disciple of Bright Moon Nunnery. No, an elder would definitely be even more charming." The Pavilion Lord smacked his lips and licked his saliva back. Lin Yu was speechless. However, he understood that the power that built this bright moon was the Bright Moon Nunnery of the Gaotian ancient nation. They were all female cultivators, and most of them were Tao companions with powerful beings. Their hidden strength was unimaginable. There were rumors that even if one were to encounter the Sky Sword sect, they would not dare to offend the Bright Moon Nunnery. From this, one could tell how horrifying the power of the Bright Moon Nunnery was. What a pity, what a pity. This dancer should at least be a descendant. I wonder why she came to the Fuho country this time. The Pavilion Lord looked at the graceful figure behind the curtains, hating the heavens for robbing him of a few hundred years. Pavilion Lord, your heart is still young. Lin Yu couldn't help but smile. He calmly looked at the curtains. However, everyone's gaze was focused on her right now. Although the woman's appearance was only faintly discernible, her graceful figure was enough to cause people's imagination to run wild. At one moment, she was like a fairy from the heavens, elegant and otherworldly. At the next moment, she was like a demoness from the underworld, endlessly charming. In any case, as the zither music continued to play, some people even forgot about the wine cups in their hands. "Right, are you proficient in the art of alchemy?" the Pavilion Lord asked. "Can you refine a few of those pills?" "Aphrodisiac?" Lin Yu said. "Of course, there's no problem." The Pavilion Lord was overjoyed and continued. "This time, the Saintess of the Bright Moon Nunnery is here to prove the legend. This time, she's here to find a Tao companion. I'm sure it's me." Faced with the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion's Pavilion Master's words, coupled with his originally sage-like appearance, Xiao Chun could not help but frown. "I'll refine it for you in a bit." Lin Yu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chapter 1434. As the music reached its climax and the Saintess of the Mingwen Nunnery danced, a strange phenomenon occurred. The lotuses in the pond bloomed and the fish jumped out of the water. I didn't expect the Saintess of the Mingwen Nunnery to have such high attainments. She has already entered the Tao through music, someone exclaimed with admiration in his eyes. Those who could enter the Mingwe Hotel were not weaklings. Some of them were not interested in the auction, but had heard the news and came specifically for the Saintess of the Mingwen Nunnery. The people of the Mingwen Nunnery had the best dual cultivation method in the entire North Star ancient nation, especially the Saintess. It was said that the Saintess of this generation had cultivated the divine techniques of the Mingwen Nunnery to an extremely high level. Therefore, the heroes of this generation all flocked to the Saintess of the Mingwen Nunnery. The saintess was even more attractive than the legendary items in the auction. Lin Yu listened to the discussions of the crowd. However, he was still very calm. His cultivation had not reached a stagnant stage. He only needed enough pills to make a breakthrough. However, the pavilion master of the heavenly secret pavilion could not hold back anymore. Old man, it's time to wipe your saliva. Sheng arrived at this moment. His cultivation had reached the late stage of the 7th step, and he was very powerful. However, he was still dressed in a black robe and had a mysterious aura. Everyone loves beauty. The pavilion master of the heavenly secret pavilion was not embarrassed at all. He wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth with his sleeve. There was an indescribable emotion in his eyes when he looked at Sheng. Sheng went to his seat. When he saw the saintess of the Mingyuan nunnery behind the curtain, his body trembled. However, it did not seem to be because of the saintess dance. It was because of some unknown emotion. The saintess of the Mingyuan nunnery glanced at Sheng inadvertently with her limpid eyes. There was a different emotion in her eyes. Lin Yu's divine consciousness was very powerful. He was probably at the peak of the 8th step now. He could clearly sense the performance of Sheng and the saintess of the Mingyuan nunnery. The two of them definitely knew each other. However, Lin Yu did not know what the relationship between the two of them was. However, the two of them only looked at each other before Sheng said, "I still need to consolidate my cultivation, so I can't stay here for long." With that, he excused himself and left the place. The pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion did not say much. He seemed to understand something. Bright Moon Hotel no longer has any empty rooms. Why don't you make do with Lin Yu? The pavilion master of the secret pavilion suggested. There was a strange look in Sheng's eyes, but he did not refuse. The boy led Sheng to Lin Yu's room. As for Lin Yu, he continued to drink with the pavilion master of the secret pavilion. Just as Lin Yu and the others were drinking, an uninvited guest quietly arrived. Xiaoya and the man arrived. The man sat directly in front of Lin Yu and said with a smile, "Brother, I see that you have the looks of a celestial being and have been paying attention to you for a long time. Would you do me the honor of drinking a few cups with me?" Then he bowed slightly to the pavilion master of the secret pavilion and said, "I've already heard of the pavilion master of the secret pavilion when I was in the imperial capital. It's an honor to meet you at last." However, there was no trace of respect in his eyes. He appeared to be very frivolous. "I'm the Sky Sword Sect's Chu Bin," the man said slowly with a hint of arrogance. The Sky Sword Sect was one of the 5 strongest sects in the entire North Star ancient nation. Even though he knew that the pavilion master of the secret pavilion was not simple, he did not show any respect. In his opinion, even if the pavilion master of the secret pavilion was not simple and had terrifying rumors, he was still just a small faction in a vassal state. In front of a colossus like the Sky Sword Sect, he was just a speck of light. The pavilion master of the secret pavilion did not answer. He only took a sip of wine with a playful look on his face. Lin Yu was also very calm as he said, "Are you done? If you are, you can leave." His words did not give the man any face at all. Lin Yu did not feel the slightest bit of fear because the man had said that he was from the Sky Sword Sect. "You?" Chu Bin faced Lin Yu's indifference and spoke with an intent to chase him away. His eyes couldn't help but turn cold. "Do you know who you were talking to?" Chu Bin said icily. "I came here to give you face. Don't be so shameless." Lin Yu raised his wine cup and took a sip. Then he slowly put it down and said, "I'm also giving you face by letting you go." In other words, the fact that Lin Yu didn't say get lost was already the greatest forgiveness he could give to the man. Lin Yu's aura was indescribable. Even if the sky fell and the earth cracked, he would not change his expression. This was an aura that was naturally formed after being in a high position for a long time. No one could imitate it. At this moment, Xiaoya also saw this and was stunned for a moment. Even the man felt a sudden shock in his heart. However, he quickly came back to his senses. He was a 7th-step existence. As a deacon in the entire Sky Sword Sect, he had a high status. However, he had been temporarily intimidated by an unknown young man. "You're courting death. Do you know the consequences of not giving the Sky Sword Sect any face?" The man smashed the table with his palm. Lin Yu's cold attitude had directly interrupted his plan. He had not expected that he would be the first to be flustered and exasperated. Sky Sword Sect? What is it? The pavilion master of the sky, secret pavilion, said indifferently, "You have disturbed Lin Yu and me. Now, kneel down and admit your mistake." The pavilion master of the sky, secret pavilion, was extremely domineering. His intimidating aura silenced the entire banquet. Although the pavilion master's cultivation was only at the 7th step, the aura on his body was extremely intimidating. It's just as the legends say. The pavilion master of the sky, secret pavilion of the Hu Marquis state was once at the 9th step, but for some unknown reason, his cultivation level fell. Those who knew were extremely shocked at this moment. Even if his cultivation level fell, the aura of a 9th step existence was still not something that ordinary people could withstand. He looked at Chu Bin indifferently. At this moment, Chu Bin felt immense pressure and almost knelt down. Even with a 7th-step cultivation, he could not withstand the pavilion master's aura. Now, the entire banquet was incomparably quiet. The moment the pavilion master of the sky, secret pavilion, spoke, Lin Yu also slowly rose to his feet. Boom! His speed was like a ghost's. There was no time for anyone to react. Although Lin Yu's Dao fruit was restricted, he could still use his remarkable abilities. When the world's end near at hand was used at such a short distance, perhaps even an 8-step powerhouse would find it difficult to react. Lin Yu kicked Chu Bin's lower abdomen. The terrifying force was like a divine mountain crashing into him. Although Lin Yu's cultivation was only at the 6th step, the strength of his battle constitution was much stronger than that of an ordinary 7th-step cultivator. Chu Bin flew several meters away. With a thud, he could not withstand the force and knelt on the ground, blood dripping from the corners of his mouth. He could not believe that Lin Yu's strength was so terrifying. His internal organs were kicked out of their original positions. Even he would not be able to recover from this injury in a short period of time. Now that he had lost control of his body, it would be difficult for him to get up in a short time. He knelt on the ground in a humiliating posture. Lin Yu only looked at the scene indifferently, as if dealing with a 7-step powerhouse was nothing to him. That's right. The pavilion master of the sky, secret pavilion, stroked his beard. However, everyone present was flabbergasted. They were not weaklings, and most of them knew people from the Sky Sword sect. When they saw a 7-step powerhouse being kicked to the ground by a 6-step cultivator and unable to move, they were all in disbelief. Chapter 1435. Everyone was terrified by the strength of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion's pavilion master and Lin Yu. They attacked without a word. They didn't care if you were from the Sky Sword sect or other sections. This caused everyone to retreat. In their hearts, they felt that the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion's pavilion master and Lin Yu were definitely existences that could not be provoked, unless you were stronger than Chu Bin in terms of background or cultivation. The sound of the zither stopped abruptly. Chu Bin felt ashamed when he saw everyone's eyes on him. He stood up with difficulty in the midst of the humiliation. You've offended the Sky Sword sect. You'll have to bear our wrath. He gnashed his teeth. Xiaoya, who was standing by the side, was stunned. For a moment, she did not know what to do. Is that so? The pavilion lord said calmly. He didn't care about the Sky Sword sect at all. He didn't seem to be afraid at all. The organization of the Divine Court was very mysterious. Even some terrifying forces were very afraid of it. The Heavenly Secrets Pavilion's pavilion master truly did not fear the Heavenly Sword sect. Lin Yu took a step forward, ready to attack again. Gentlemen, can you give me some face? This is the Minghua Pavilion. A graceful woman pulled the curtain aside and appeared in front of everyone. She had an appearance that could turn all living things upside down. Her figure was graceful, and her charm caused everyone to shift their gazes over. For a moment, they were all stunned. She was the saintess of the Mingyuan nunnery, Lu Rushi. This was indeed the Mingyuan nunnery's place. Lin Yu didn't have any feud with the Mingyuan nunnery, so he stopped. He didn't care about Chu Bin anymore. Since the saintess of the Mingyuan nunnery has spoken, I'll give you some face. The pavilion lord stroked his beard and said, Lin Yu, come back. Thank you, pavilion lord. Lu Rushi bowed and continued, Thank you, young Master Lin. Lu Rushi had been well-mannered since she was young. She was very good at etiquette. She took good care of everyone. Xiaoya, the Lord of the Sky Sword Sect, is going to treat his injuries and get some medicine from the elixir room, Lu Rushi continued. Then she personally arranged seats for Lin Yu and Chu Bin. The banquet continued. However, some of them felt grateful to Chu Bin. It was because of him that they were able to witness Lu Rushi's beauty. Lu Rushi handled the situation well and soon calmed the storm. At this moment, Xiaoyu was supporting Chu Bin. Her heart had already turned cold. After this incident, although Lu Rushi did not say anything, she would definitely be punished. At the same time, he also witnessed Lin Yu's strength. He deeply regretted his stupidity just now. Even if Lin Yu had ignored him just now, if he could have fawned over him again, things wouldn't have turned out this way. After the storm calmed down. Behind the curtain, Lu Rushi could not help but take another look at Lin Yu. She seemed to be thinking about something. The banquet ended late into the night. Everyone was still unsatisfied, and they drank for a long time at the table. However, Lin Yu returned to his room first. He was not really interested in the banquet. If it weren't for the pavilion leader's invitation, he wouldn't have come at all. The auction would start in 3 days, and they were still in the midst of preparations. After Lin Yu returned to his room, he saw Sheng sitting cross-legged on the ground. There was a bedding below him. Lin Yu was a little confused. When Sheng saw Lin Yu return, he said, Brother Lin, don't misunderstand. I'm just not used to sleeping with others. Lin Yu nodded and said, I need to go out. He wanted to go to the auction to sell the elixirs he had refined in exchange for some divine objects. Are you going to the auction? Sheng asked. Lin Yu nodded. After walking out of the Bright Moon Hotel, Lin Yu came to the main hall of the auction. There were people in charge of registration here. Even though it was late at night, there were still people sitting here. In the auction, not only would there be divine objects brought from the imperial capital, but there would also be some cultivators' items. For medicinal pills, there had always been a demand but no supply. This was especially so for the true spirit elixir that Lin Yu had refined. Only a few people knew the recipe. Furthermore, it was extremely difficult to refine, and its medicinal effects were extremely shocking. Therefore, it was extremely rare to see it in an auction in the entire North Star ancient country. Fellow cultivator, do you have any items to auction? The person in charge of registration and verification was an old man. His eyes were filled with wisdom. I'm here to auction a few elixirs, Lin Yu said. Are you an alchemist? The old man asked. There weren't many alchemists in the entire North Star ancient country. The requirements for cultivators were extremely strict. Moreover, in this world, strength was everything. Although elixirs were extremely important to cultivators, they were only supplementary. Spending a huge amount of money to study the art of alchemy would only hinder one's cultivation. Therefore, in the North Star ancient country, it was rare to see someone like Lin Yu who could refine elixirs and cultivate at the same time. After all, a person's energy was limited. Lin Yu nodded lightly. As for the other items, he didn't have much. The old man was very wise. He didn't ask too much. Earlier, he only registered Lin Yu's identity. Therefore, everyone felt confident in their hearts during the auction. May I know what grade of elixirs you want to auction? The old man looked at Lin Yu and didn't have much hope. This was because Lin Yu looked too young. Even if he had terrifying talent, he would only be a 3rd or 4th grade alchemist. However, this kind of elixir could only be used in an auction like this. It wouldn't cause too much of a commotion. I have a lot of elixirs here, Lin Yu said. As he waved his hand, dozens of jade bottles appeared on the table. The old man remained calm. He could tell with a single glance that most of the elixirs here were 4th or 5th grade. However, this also exceeded his expectations. Lin Yu's grade as an alchemist was a level higher than he expected. The old man nodded slightly and said, I'll verify the medicinal strength for you right away. It was rare to see such a young, 5th grade alchemist in the North Star ancient country. He deserved to be treated well. However, When he opened a few jade bottles, he was shocked by the quality of the elixirs inside. The 4th and 5th grade elixirs all had 9 patterns. This was a sign that the quality of the elixirs had reached the pinnacle. These elixirs. The old man was speechless for a moment. Although there were only 4th or 5th grade elixirs here, because of the patterns on them, their value would increase by several times. The toxicity of these elixirs was almost non-existent. It was very effective for some large forces to lay the foundation for their juniors. After he verified them one by one, he came to the last 2 jade bottles. Lin Yu didn't pay much attention to them. He placed these elixirs casually. Therefore, the old man didn't realize what he was going to see next. When he opened the last 2 jade bottles, he originally thought that they would also be 4th or 5th grade elixirs with 9 patterns. However, a ray of light rushed up, and the entire hall was filled with the fragrance of medicine. While the old man was shocked, he immediately used a method to seal all the medicinal strength. The sound of wind and thunder could be heard faintly. A 7th grade elixir that survived the pill lightning. The old man was shocked. However, Lin Yu was very calm. The old man was excited. After the ray of light disappeared, the elixir inside appeared. There were also 9 runes on it. A 7th grade elixir with 9 patterns. This was rare in the entire North Star ancient country. It was usually priceless. Chapter 1436. As long as a pill was born, it meant that there would be a crazy fight for it. The old man's eyes were filled with shock. He couldn't regain his senses for a while. He only reacted after a long time. He was wrong all along. The young man in front of him wasn't a 5th grade alchemist. He was a 7th grade alchemist. It was rare to see someone like that in the entire ancient country. As long as one's identity was known by others, it was likely that even the legendary great sects would want to invite one to enter their sects as a guest elder. Moreover, Lin Yu didn't look old. This meant that his potential was limitless. The old man came from the imperial capital of the Gauchan ancient country. He knew a few alchemists. Some of them were 7th grade and even 8th grade alchemists. However, it was impossible for them to have such attainments at his age. Moreover, this 7th grade pill had 9 runes. It was an existence that had passed the pill tribulation. Its value was immeasurable. However, the old man soon realized that the alchemist in front of him seemed to be worth much more than this pill. If he could take him into his camp. However, this was only a thought in the old man's mind. Such a young 7th grade alchemist. He was probably born in an alchemy family. That was why he had such high attainments. The Gauchan ancient country was vast. There were many secluded sects in it. Naturally, there were many alchemy powers. Only those who came from those secluded sects would have such talent. Did you refine this grade 7 elixir? The old man's attitude had already become very respectful. In this world, those who were more capable were the teachers. If Lin Yu was really a 7th grade alchemist, he was worthy of the old man's respect. Lin Yu nodded. He didn't deny it. What he needed was to increase the value of his pill. If he said that he got it from somewhere else, he would be coveted by others. He might as well say that he refined it himself. Now that he knew the strength of the divine court, he didn't believe that there was anyone in those sects who could threaten him. I'll arrange for your pill to be auctioned immediately, said the old man. Thank you, said Lin Yu. This is the VIP seat. You can use this badge to enter one of the private rooms. The old man said. The private rooms were all prepared for the major powers, but now that the old man had taken a fancy to Lin Yu's alchemy grade and potential, giving him a private room was the same as throwing out an olive branch. However, Lin Yu did not reveal any emotions. After experiencing so many things, his state of mind was no longer something that could be affected by such simple matters. The old man was a little surprised by Lin Yu's state of mind, but he didn't say anything. After Lin Yu finished, he turned around and left. Now, all they had to do was wait for the auction to begin in 3 days. He was quite interested in the last few items, especially the legendary ancient scroll that contained the records of forbidden grounds. It was something he was determined to get his hands on. After arriving at the tomorrow night pavilion, Lin Yu went to the pavilion master's room. He knew that it would be difficult for him to obtain what he needed if he only relied on what he obtained from the auction. Sit. Although the pavilion master couldn't deduce what Lin Yu was thinking, he could guess what Lin Yu was thinking when he saw him. However, he didn't say out loud. Lin Yu went straight to the point and said, "Pavilion master, I came to find you this time to borrow some origin stones." Origin stones were the hard currency of this world. They were also the currency of the cultivation world. They were divided into 4 grades: high, medium, low, and top grade. The legendary immortal grade was rarely seen in the entire North Star ancient nation. The pavilion master didn't refuse and directly asked, "How much do you need?" 100,000, said Lin Yu calmly. This was the value of the ancient scroll that he estimated. There should still be some left. 100,000 wasn't a small number. The function of origin stones wasn't as simple as currency. Origin stones were the condensation of origin chi between heaven and earth. After countless years of extraction, they formed a substance that could allow a cultivator to quickly advance. 100,000 origin stones were enough for a 7-step cultivator to break through. No problem. The pavilion master took out a storage bag and handed it to Lin Yu. The pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion had once been extremely powerful. Although his strength had fallen, his accumulation over the years was still extremely terrifying. 100,000 origin stones might be a terrifying sum to an ordinary 7-step powerhouse, but it was nothing to the pavilion master of the Divine Secret Pavilion. Therefore, he casually gave it to Lin Yu. "Thank you." Lin Yu took the storage bag and thanked him. "Don't forget about the pill," reminded the pavilion master. He hadn't forgotten about it. "I'll give it to you tomorrow," said Lin Yu. The pavilion master was old, but his heart wasn't old. He was still thinking about the pill. In this world, longevity pills were extremely rare. Moreover, they were severely suppressed by heaven and earth. Even a 9-step cultivator could only live for 7,000 years. The pavilion master was already 5,000 years old. He was definitely one of the oldest cultivators in the North Star ancient nation. He was a living ancient history. That little girl from Mingwen Nunnery seems to be looking for you. What a pity. The pavilion master sighed. His eyes were already filled with envy. Lin Yu nodded slightly. Sure enough, after bidding farewell, a maid from Mingwen Nunnery came to Lin Yu's room and invited Lin Yu to the top floor. Lin Yu didn't know what the saintess of Mingwen Nunnery meant. However, from the pavilion master's words, it didn't seem to be a bad thing. Seeing Lin Yu agree, Sheng said, he seemed to be sulking at the side. "Brother Sheng, what's wrong?" asked Lin Yu. At this moment, Sheng turned his head and explained, "I'm angry that the saintess of Mingwen Nunnery was so blind that she didn't invite me." After saying that, he turned his head to the side again. He circulated his cultivation technique and ignored Lin Yu. Lin Yu shook his head. At this moment, he looked at Sheng with a strange expression. He thought to himself, is this Sheng a rabbit? This was because from Sheng's tone, it was obvious that he wasn't angry because of this. His tone seemed to be directed at Lin Yu. However, Lin Yu didn't think too much about it. He had already followed the maid and walked through the antique corridor. He stepped onto the last layer of the array formation. Following the ripples of the light curtain, he arrived at the top floor. This was a pavilion. It was like a small island. All right, the last young master is here. At this moment, a woman in charge walked to the front leisurely. The saintess of Mingwen Nunnery was still nowhere to be seen. With Lin Yu's arrival, a beautiful figure appeared behind the curtain. The one who spoke was a short-haired woman. She looked very capable, but her skin was smooth. Although she addressed him respectfully as young master, there was a hint of coldness in her eyes. However, there was no doubt that the short-haired woman was also very beautiful. She was dressed in tight clothes, which accentuated her flawless figure. "I'm Yuling Long. I believe you already know the reason why I invited you here, young masters," the woman said slowly after introducing herself. Those who could come here were all geniuses of their respective regions. Their emotions didn't waver too much because of this. Their states of mind were very calm. They didn't feel complacent because they came here and obtained the qualifications. They didn't lose their manners because of that. Chapter 1437. Miss Yuling Long. May I know what sort of test this time around is? A handsome man asked with a faint smile as he waved a folding fan in his hand. Music, Yuling Long explained. Let's see if everyone has comprehended anything. There are a total of 3 rounds of tests. Are you all confident? Yuling Long asked. However, those who were qualified to come here were all outstanding people of their respective regions. Their cultivation and talent were all terrifying. Most of them were already at the 7th step. In an entire North Star ancient nation, those who could reach this realm at this age had a high chance of attaining the Great Tao. Naturally, there is no problem. The man waving the folding fan looked at Yuling Long and smiled faintly. However, I am not interested in the saintess. I wonder if Miss Yuling Long will give me some face and give me a chance. Yuling Long was undoubtedly extremely beautiful. In some aspects, she was even comparable to Lu Ruyan. Both of them had their own merits. However, some people had some understanding of the legends of Mingyuan nunnery. There were once 3 candidates for the saintess. They all cultivated the legendary divine techniques. There was not much difference between the 3. The man waving the folding fan clearly knew of this legend. He guessed that Yuling Long should be one of them. Let's see if you have the strength, Yuling Long said coldly. Her strength was already at the late stage 7th step. Perhaps there were not many people present who could be her match. However, Lin Yu sat at the back with flagging interest. Lin Yu could give Yuling Long and Lu Ruyan 90 points. However, he was no longer interested in them. His goal was not here. After drinking the tea, he prepared to leave. He thought of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion's Pavilion Master's elixir. He still needed to refine it. Hence, he slowly stood up and said, Taoist Yuling Long, I still have some matters to attend to. I will take my leave first. He was bidding her farewell. There were a total of 7 people, and they all looked at him. Yuling Long was no exception. The expression in her eyes changed slightly. This was because no one was not interested in Mingyuan nunnery's test. Yuling Long could not help but take a few more glances at him. This caused the eyes of the man with the folding fan, who already had designs on Yuling Long, to turn cold. You want to use such a method to attract attention? Truly foolish, someone mocked from the side. Now, they were extremely disgusted by Lin Yu's actions. It's fine that he came late and delayed our time. Now, he even dares to leave before the examination of the Mingyuan nunnery. Who does he think he is? Someone said again. Obviously, all of this could be said to Yuling Long and Lu Ru behind the curtain. He wanted to win the favor of the Mingyuan nunnery. I know. Isn't this the person beside the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion in Fuho country? During the banquet, he insulted the Heavenly Sword Gates deacon. Someone recognized Lin Yu's identity. He's just a grandstander, someone said disdainfully. Although Lin Yu's strength was shocking enough. However, in their eyes, it was still only the 6th step. In this place, he was still unpresentable. They were all quite young, and the weakest among them was already at the 7th step. Lin Yu directly locked onto the few people who spoke in secret and said indifferently, Grandstander, why don't we have a spar? He said coldly. His divine consciousness had already locked onto the few people who spoke. He continued, why don't I help the 2 from the Mingyuan nunnery to test them first? As soon as these words came out, everyone's eyes narrowed. At the same time, some people were already angry. Lin Yu's words were too arrogant, especially the 3 people who started to mock and ridicule Lin Yu. At this moment, they directly stood up and said, Come, let me see what right a 6th step ant has to say such presumptuous words. A burly man with bronze skin came directly to Lin Yu's side at this moment. Lin Yu was in front of him. He was only as tall as his shoulder and looked very thin and weak. Pathetic. Lin Yu shook his head and said, I didn't want to stay here. I was originally giving you a chance. Why do you have to act like a clown and think that you're a genius of a region? The burly man was not angry at this moment. Instead, he laughed and said, You choose a grave for yourself, the man continued. He already had the intention to kill Lin Yu because of his arrogant words. He looked directly at Lin Yu with a wave of pressure. As you wish, Lin Yu said indifferently. After I kill you, how many more will there be? Come at me together. I'm in a hurry. His words were indifferent, but there was no doubt that they had angered everyone present. "Kid, don't be arrogant." At this moment, a man with a sword on his back stood up and pointed his sword at him. Lin Yu crossed his arms in front of his chest. However, he thought that since things had come to this point, perhaps he could use this competition to obtain a large number of Dawnstones. These were all outstanding people from the major factions who were in charge of this auction. There must be a lot of Dawnstones among the items that the factions had their eyes on. Lin Yu did not like to owe others. These people might have more than 100,000 Dawnstones on them. Chung Feng of the Ancient Origins sect, "I will kill you today," the man with the sword on his back said indifferently. Then, a few more people stepped forward. However, Lin Yu was clearly impatient. He said, "I don't need to know your names. I'm not interested. Do you want to come at me together, or one by one?" Lin Yu was still as arrogant as ever. After continuous refinement, the power he had obtained from the Forbidden Area had already reached the peak of the 6th step. He could use this battle to break through to the 7th step. Someone was so angry that he laughed and said, "I don't know why a 6th step ant dares to speak so arrogantly." Lin Yu looked on indifferently. "Let's go. I don't want Bright Moon Nunnery's saintess to see blood. I'll kill you outside," the man with the sword on his back said. "I wonder if the two of you mind?" The man with the fan still had a faint smile on his face. He was also prepared to attack Lin Yu. However, he asked Yu Linglong. He looked very gentlemanly. However, Yu Linglong was not interested in the man with the fan at all. Now, she was looking at Lin Yu with a little more interest. Lin Yu looked handsome. In front of the burly man, he was not eye-catching at all. However, the aura he gave off was indescribable. People could not help but take a few more glances at him. "No problem," Yu Linglong said. She had always paid attention to cultivation. Otherwise, she would not have reached the late stage of the 7th step. "I hope that the few of you are just competing and that no one dies," Lu Rushi said. After all, these people had come here because of Bright Moon Nunnery, which had caused this conflict. If someone died, it would not be good for Bright Moon Nunnery. "In that case, let's use the things you have on you as the wager," Lin Yu said. This was also one of his goals while doing Bright Moon Nunnery a favor. "Since the saintess has said so, I won't kill you today. I'll just cripple you," the man with the fan said. Lin Yu's arrogant and domineering words had undoubtedly infuriated the geniuses here. They were all geniuses of their respective regions. They had always been surrounded by others. They did not expect to be looked down upon in Fuho country. Moreover, this contempt came from someone whose cultivation was one level lower than theirs. This was unbearable for them. Chapter 1438. Everyone, there's no need to waste your breath on him. The two saintesses of the Bright Moon Nunnery are still waiting for us. The man with the folding fan was still smiling. However, there was a hint of cruelty in his smile at this moment. Although the saintesses of the Bright Moon Nunnery had spoken, it was inevitable that they would fail in the competition. Lin Yu's divine senses were sharp, and he could clearly sense the killing intent. He calmly looked at the man who was fanning himself with a fan in his hand. The crowd turned into flowing lights and arrived at an empty place. It was a platform. "Let me go first," the burly man said with a sinister expression. 100,000 origin stones for one round, Lin Yu said calmly. The burly man was stunned when he heard that. However, he gritted his teeth and agreed. 100,000 origin stones was not a small amount for him. Some of the origin stones were even used by his family to bid for an item. However, he did not believe that he would lose. As he spoke, he waved his hand, and the origin stones beside him piled up into a small mountain. Essence chi overflowed and turned into rays of light. "Since Brother Boo has already taken out origin stones, what about you? Don't you have any?" The man with the folding fan reminded him sarcastically. Lin Yu did not care. He waved his hand, and 100,000 origin stones appeared at the same time. The burly man's eyes turned cold. He wanted to get rid of this brat as soon as possible. Just now, the burly man had arrived in front of Lin Yu first. Therefore, they did not reject him when he made the first move. They had their own pride and would not gang up on him. "This is the stupidest decision you've ever made," Lin Yu said. Above the bright moon hotel, Lu Linglong's bell-like voice rang out. Linglong, go and take a look. That's what I was thinking, Yu Linglong said. She turned into a flowing light and arrived at the battlefield. I will tear your mouth apart, the burly man said. He took the initiative to make the first move. During the banquet, they had seen Lin Yu make his move. However, the way they saw it, the Heavenly Sword Sect's attendants had weak cultivation bases, and the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion had suppressed them. That was why Lin Yu had been able to take advantage of the situation. However, there was no one else to interfere. After all, Lin Yu was only a six-step cultivator. Every realm was a layer of heaven. Moreover, they were all prodigies of their respective domains. In terms of strength, divine abilities, Dharma artifacts, and so on, they would not be too far behind. There wasn't much of a difference. The burly man's bronze skin gradually rippled with golden light. There were runes on his skin. Somewhat similar, Lin Yu thought to himself. As his cultivation base improved in this world, he understood more and more that the laws of this world seemed to be similar to the laws of this universe and the land of origin. It was hard to say who was more profound. The runes on the man's body began to spread, further confirming Lin Yu's thoughts. This world was inextricably linked to the land of origin. Lin Yu had used these body-refining runes to raise his battle constitution to the highest level. However, the runes on the man's body were still of a very low level. They didn't catch Lin Yu's attention. Compared to the runes of all the beasts he'd obtained in the secret place, these runes were far inferior. They were far less profound. Although Lin Yu's battle constitution was no longer what it used to be, he'd still mastered the three moves of the ancient divine and the mysterious power of runes. All he needed was a simple demonstration. Blood chi swirled around him, making him look like a god of war. As the runes intertwined, his temperament seemed to change. He became incomparably domineering. He was like a god who'd conquered the heavens. It was a sight to behold. Yu Linglong's expression changed slightly when she arrived. Her cultivation was far superior to everyone else's. She could tell at a glance that Lin Yu's mastery of power was profound. For a moment, she couldn't find the origin of Lin Yu's technique. However, it had something in common with the burly man's runes. Boom! A terrifying sound of collision rang out. The earth on the ground churned and cracked like a spider web, causing the earth to shake and the mountains to shake. If it weren't for the powerful restriction here, it might have affected Royal City. The burly man retreated dozens of feet. His arm was bent in a twisted position. Under this blow, his right arm was broken. This scene caused everyone's heart to palpitate. However, the burly man was very tenacious. He didn't cry out in pain. He recovered with his powerful battle constitution. He allowed the bones in his hand to reassemble. However, Lin Yu clearly didn't want to give him a chance. He charged out of the smoke and dust. The runes were withdrawn and had completely merged with his flesh. What kind of body-refining technique are you practicing? The burly man felt a terrifying pressure. Even the legendary figures of the eighth step and his family hadn't felt this before. This wasn't because of Lin Yu's cultivation, but because the technique he'd used was similar to the body-refining techniques passed down in his family. They both used runes to enhance one's strength. Moreover, Lin Yu's mastery of runes and mastery of them were much better than his own. They weren't even on the same level. Boom! A blazing punch. Lin Yu's speed was unparalleled. The burly man couldn't dodge at all. He could only passively raise his arm to meet the blow. Terrifying ripples. The burly man was sent flying into the mountain. The enormous mountain collapsed with a rumble. The man emerged from within with great difficulty. Half of his body had almost collapsed, and blood was flowing from his mouth and nose. This level of injury could only be healed by a man. Lin Yu stood indifferently in place and asked, "Do you want to continue?" His voice was very calm and carried an aura of disdain for the world. Although he was still domineering, he didn't show the slightest hint of mockery. "I lost." The burly man no longer had any strength to fight. His internal organs had been displaced. If he continued to fight, he might die. At the same time, he also knew that he was definitely not Lin Yu's match. It was too terrifying. He didn't understand how a six-step cultivator could possess such terrifying power. Moreover, his mastery of divine abilities had reached the pinnacle. Even the legendary eight-step cultivators in his family couldn't reach Lin Yu's current level. He had been thoroughly defeated and had no choice but to accept the fact. He left the arena dejectedly. Lin Yu put away the 100,000 origin stones. Then, he looked at the others and said, "Who else?" His words were very light, but to the others, they were incomparably oppressive. After the battle, just now, no one looked down on Lin Yu anymore. However, the man with the sword on his back still entered the arena. The burly man was only at the beginning of the seventh step. He was the weakest among them. Although Lin Yu gave them a great shock, it wasn't enough to make them cower. "Prepare the origin stones," Lin Yu said. This was something that he cared about. The man with the sword on his back waved his hand, and the origin stones appeared in the arena. With the appearance of the two piles of origin stones, the place was filled with multicolored light that dyed half of the sky red. The man was very smart. He knew that Lin Yu's combat body was very powerful, so he avoided the attack. The long sword on his back was unsheathed and circled in the sky. Then, it evolved into a sea of sword chi that attacked Lin Yu. The scene was undoubtedly shocking and terrifying. However, Lin Yu was still very calm. The stone sword had become a supreme weapon that was being nurtured in his sea of consciousness. It was difficult for him to use it with his current strength. As he bent two of his fingers, a similarly sharp sword chi appeared in the entire battlefield. There were some patterns on the sword chi, as if it was a real sword. This was the power that Lin Yu had comprehended in the powerhouse's ruins in the Forbidden Area. Combined with Ancestor Lu's sword kinesis technique, it was now displaying its power, although this technique was still inferior to the power of runes. However, Lin Yu was, after all, an existence that was about to break through to the supreme level. He had completely mastered the various techniques that he had mastered. Even an eight-step powerhouse who had immersed himself in it for his entire life wouldn't be as proficient as Lin Yu. Chapter 1439. Thousands of sword chi converged into a sea. Lin Yu now saw the appearance of the realm sea. The boundless sword energy directly transformed into a realm sea. Even the people standing in the distance felt their hearts palpitate. "Is this still the power of a six-step cultivator?" someone said in shock. He didn't have the intention to join the battle. He came here just to observe the battle. When he saw Lin Yu's performance, he was really shocked. At the same time, he was secretly convinced. There was no reason to make enemies. Lin Yu was too powerful. The power he displayed now had exceeded their understanding. Not only was his combat physique unparalleled, but his divine ability was also unprecedented. The sword chi turned into a sea of sword chi. At this time, the long sword of the man with a long sword on his back was completely crushed into powder and scattered on the ground. The realm sea was majestic and supreme. Since ancient times, no one knew its origin, nor where its end was. Lin Yu's sword chi seemed to exist forever. Even if the man with a sword on his back had used the forbidden technique of his sect, it was still difficult to reverse the situation. He had already formed a situation where he was bound to lose. The clothes on his body were all torn, and there were wounds everywhere. Lin Yu was like a god, cold and emotionless. At this time, he just stood above the sword chi realm sea. The divine ability he displayed and the phantom formed, doesn't it look like the place recorded in the legend? Someone murmured at this time. They were all from big forces, and at this time, they all frowned. The place was in the unknown place. In the ancient books, there were only a few records. But at this time, it was remembered by people. Their eyes were filled with suspicion. Lin Yu's divine sense was very sharp. He thought, "I didn't expect there to be records of the realm sea in this world." This undoubtedly made Lin Yu more convinced that this world once had a connection with the land of origin. Otherwise, it wouldn't know the existence of the realm sea. Chi, the sword light, pierced the arm of the man with a sword on his back. The man was now unable to fight anymore. Lin Yu did not take his life, which could be considered as giving face to Mingyuan nunnery. After all, he had learned about how powerful the Mingyuan nunnery was from the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion's pavilion master. Furthermore, the inheritance seemed to come from outside the North Star ancient nation. That was an unknown place, shrouded in mystery since ancient times. Everything related to that place, be it power or artifacts, was extremely terrifying. Therefore, Lin Yu did not want to provoke him now. It would be best if he could befriend him. This was also the reason why Lin Yu had agreed to enter the attic. However, he did not expect that the Holy Maiden of the Bright Moon Nunnery would choose her husband in the attic. I lost. The man with the sword on his back said calmly. Against Lin Yu, it was difficult for him to stir up any waves. At this point, he could only admit his failure. Although the loss of 100,000 origin stones was a heartache to the sword-bearing man's sect, it could affect the auction later on. However, the man with the sword on his back had an extraordinary status, so he wouldn't suffer much. Lin Yu put away the origin stones. Then, he glanced at the people around him and said indifferently, "Still stubborn?" His words were indifferent. In other words, he wanted everyone here to attack together. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the slightest chance. Several people gritted their teeth. Finally, the man with the folding fan in his hand no longer had a smile on his face. His expression was very solemn. Even though he was at the late stage of the seventh step, he didn't have the confidence to face Lin Yu now. This feeling was inexplicable. "Let's attack together and suppress him," someone said. The man with the folding fan took the lead and stepped forward. At this moment, someone struggled and also went forward. There were a total of 5 people. Now, a terrifying power erupted, illuminating the world. Some people noticed the fluctuations here and were very shocked. Some powerful cultivators could tell at a glance that this was definitely a 7th-step expert in a battle. I wonder who is the existence that is worth so many 7th-step cultivators to attack. At this moment, someone was interested and quickly rushed here. There were countless experts who came to the Fuho country, and there was no lack of 8th-step experts. Among them, there were also the elders of these people. They all noticed the aura of the successors of their factions and frowned slightly. They turned into streaks of light and quickly approached this place. Lin Yu saw the 5 people charging towards him at the same time. The man with the folding fan who attacked first was now at the back. Lin Yu sneered. The man with the folding fan was the one who had said those words to Lin Yu. He realized that Lin Yu's threat was too great. If Lin Yu continued like this, Lin Yu might be the only qualified person left in Mingyuan Nunnery. Even if they lost and could live, most of the saintesses of Mingyuan Nunnery were married to the most talented and powerful person in the Gaochen ancient country. They also lost the right to compete. Although the man with the folding fan came for Yu Linglong, if he lost, Yu Linglong was also a saintess-to-be. It was natural for her to look down on him. However, now that he had joined forces, Yu Linglong was already looking down on him. Yu Linglong was hiding in the dark, watching the competition. "Arrogant brat. Today, I'll let you know why you can't touch us," someone shouted. Lin Yu stood above the sea of swords without any fear. In the blink of an eye, Azura's shadow appeared behind him and became one of his clones. It directly faced one of the people. What kind of divine ability is this? Someone was surprised. The Azura's illusory figure faced him. The man was shocked because he realized that he was being suppressed. This was definitely Lin Yu's divine ability and not some puppet. A divine ability used by a 6-step cultivator could actually suppress a 7-step cultivator. This shocked him. However, he could only grit his teeth and endure. 4 fellow cultivators quickly suppressed this person. That person shouted. Among the 5 people, other than the man with the folding fan, there were 2 others who were in the late stage 7th step. They were already 1 realm higher than Lin Yu. Now that the sea of swords was constantly shattering, it could not withstand the pressure from all sides and was showing signs of collapse. This made these people's eyes turn cold. Lin Yu was not invincible. It was impossible for him to go against the flow and kill the immortals. He was fighting a cultivator who was almost 1 realm higher than him alone, but he still showed signs of being unable to hold on. Moreover, these people were all the successors of their factions. They had endless means. Lin Yu took half a step back. So that's all there is to it. The difference in realm is not something that you can match with some tricks, someone said arrogantly. A six-step cultivator is still just an ant in our eyes, someone said with a smile. As the battle had entered a white-hot stage, someone rushed over. They were shocked when they saw the fluctuations just now. There were several seven-step powerhouses. They're actually besieging a six-step cultivator. Someone was dumbfounded. A female cultivator rubbed her eyes in disbelief, unable to believe what she was seeing. That person is the person beside the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion. His name seems to be Lin Yu. He's the one who kicked the deacon of the Heavenly Sword sect to the ground. At this moment, someone recognized Lin Yu. However, what he did not know was that after a few hours of recuperation and taking pills, the deacon of the Heavenly Sword sect had already arrived. When they heard people talking about Lin Yu, they did not forget to mention him. Their faces darkened. Chapter 1440. My family's Chilin's son. Several old men walked together. The aura on their bodies was like an eternal furnace burning. They were all introducing their own prodigies and were invited into the pavilion by the saintess of the Bright Moon Nunnery. They should be in the middle of a competition. They were still discussing which family's Chilin's son would be able to win the favor of the saintess of the Bright Moon Nunnery. But when they arrived and saw the scene in front of them, their faces fell instantly. They realized that it wasn't a competition, but their Chilin's son was besieging a young man whose cultivation level was lower than theirs. And he didn't seem to be completely suppressed. How shocking was that? Even those legendary figures had to wipe their eyes and couldn't believe what they were seeing. The man with a folding fan also sensed that his family's elders had arrived. At the same time, more and more people had gathered. They were already embarrassed to besiege a cultivator whose cultivation level was lower than theirs. And they hadn't killed him for a long time. Everyone, there's no need to hide. Don't let others see you as a joke, said the man with a folding fan. Screech. There was a clear screech. The man's folding fan turned into a huge bird that was dozens of feet long. It was surrounded by black flames. Has the Nine Serenities sect already used their strongest technique? Asked a legendary figure. They didn't intervene. For a sect, this was a very embarrassing thing. They sensed that more and more people had arrived. They didn't want to continue fighting and use their strongest techniques. With all their techniques, they had the power to burn mountains and boil seas. The earth had turned into magma and was gathering towards the low-lying areas. That Lin Yu is in danger, someone said with a sigh. Although they didn't know why these prodigies were besieging Lin Yu, they knew from the situation that Lin Yu wouldn't be able to escape today. The difference in cultivation level is like a chasm. Even if Lin Yu is amazing and can crush the Deacon of the Sky Rapier sect, these prodigies are not on the same level as the successor of a big force, someone commented. The Deacon of the Sky Sword sect, who was in the crowd, had a dark expression on his face. That was until the person who commented felt a chill run down his spine. He turned his head around and immediately shut his mouth, not daring to say another word. Lin Yu calmly looked at the big move that was coming towards him. Exactly. Lin Yu's lips curled into a smile. You're about to die, yet you still dare to laugh? Have you been scared, silly? One of the people who attacked spoke coldly. The man with the folding fan had a bad feeling, but he couldn't find the source. Seeing the five of them using their strongest techniques, no matter how amazing they were only six-step cultivators. It was impossible to block such a terrifying attack. However, this was exactly what Lin Yu wanted. Now, he had reached the bottleneck of the peak of the sixth step. It was only a step away, but it required a great deal of strength to break through the shackles. The strongest attack of the seventh step came at just the right time. This was also one of the reasons why Lin Yu wanted everyone to attack together. He wanted to borrow this power to complete his breakthrough. Seeing the attack approaching, Yuling Yu shook her head. Yuling Long also shook her head. She had used all her attacks to block all of Lin Yu's escape routes. He can't escape this calamity. She sighed softly. Lin Yu was amazing, but he was too arrogant. Yu Linglong originally thought that Lin Yu wasn't such a person, but now, facing 5 7-step cultivators, it was difficult for him to do anything. Boom! A terrifying wave of energy enveloped the area. Everything was unfathomable. The wave of energy swept out, making the place feel like it was in hell. Even those who were watching from afar could feel the immense pressure. It's over. The man with the folding fan used his strongest technique. At this moment, his forehead was covered in sweat. A smile reappeared at the corner of his mouth. But soon, the smile came to an abrupt end. At the center of the remaining power, a terrifying, devouring power suddenly erupted. In an instant, all the energy and matter in the area were sucked dry. The world turned dark. Lin Yu appeared in the sky. At this moment, he carried an indescribable aura, but there was no doubt that it was extremely powerful. He'd broken through to the 7th step. His body was surrounded by black flames. This was the man with the folding fan's technique, but it was only embers. A folding fan appeared in Lin Yu's hand. As Lin Yu gently squeezed it, it turned into powder. It was a sharp weapon bestowed by the sect. But now, in the hands of Lin Yu, it was easily destroyed. The terror of his battle constitution was beyond people's imagination. When Lin Yu was at the 6th step, the 5 of them couldn't effectively suppress him under the siege. In the end, they had no choice but to use their strongest technique. But now, Lin Yu had dissolved it, and he'd broken through to the 7th step. Facing Lin Yu, the 5 of them couldn't help but gulp. It was obvious that the 5 of them wanted to kill him. Lin Yu's eyes were indifferent. If we don't get rid of this kid, he'll always be our inner demon. Someone exclaimed and shouted crazily. He took the initiative to attack. After using his strongest technique, he was almost exhausted. But now, everyone was watching. The pavilion master of the Heavenly Secret Pavilion also came, followed by Sheng and 2 boys. They also sensed the fluctuations of the battle here. Sheng was shocked. He never thought that Lin Yu's strength was so terrifying. He hasn't used his true strength. Sheng was now certain. The 5 of them were ready to attack again. The legendary figures in the sky frowned slightly. When they saw the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secret Pavilion, they could only sigh helplessly. Even they were very afraid of the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secret Pavilion. They knew that the 5 of them had no chance of winning now, and they could clearly sense that Lin Yu had the intention to kill. Those who could reach the level of legendary figures in major forces were not stupid. At this moment, they all came down and stopped their own prodigies. You're no longer his match. Stop. They sighed. If the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secret Pavilion hadn't come here, they might have killed Lin Yu mercilessly. But now it was impossible. Elder, I. One of them wanted to explain, but he didn't know what to say. You've made the right decision, Lin Yu said. He didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Your juniors have lost the bet with me. Hand over the origin stones. Lin Yu was still thinking about the origin stones. Are you sure you want the origin stones? One of the legendary figures had a cold expression. We've already given you face by coming here. Do you really think we don't dare to kill you? The elder, the man with the folding fan, said slowly. He looked over with a terrifying pressure. The 8th step. Lin Yu sneered. A layer of green light rippled on his body. He also used his divine will to counterattack. Chi. Everyone present felt an intense pain in their heads, as if their heads were about to explode. At this moment, the elder, the man with the folding fan, let out a muffled groan and staggered back a few steps. He didn't expect Lin Yu's divine will to be so powerful. The elder of the man with the folding fan originally wanted to use his divine will to suppress Lin Yu, but now he was the one who suffered. Facing Lin Yu's divine will, he felt as if he had been hit by a divine mountain. If he hadn't immediately used all of his divine will to suppress the situation, he might not have just taken a few steps back. Your juniors want to kill me. If you want to redeem yourself, take out 200,000 origin stones, Lin Yu said indifferently. The remaining 100,000 is to be used to redeem your juniors. Chapter 1441. In everyone's eyes, Lin Yu's words were extremely arrogant. He was facing an eighth-step expert, an existence that was as rare as a phoenix feather and a Chilean horn in the entire North Star ancient nation. Just one of them could suppress a large sect for thousands of years. However, Lin Yu's eyes did not show the slightest bit of fear. He spoke very naturally. Does Lin Yu want to die? Even if he broke through to the seventh step, does he think he's invincible? Someone at the side was puzzled. In their eyes, Lin Yu's actions were simply courting death. Even if he had the Pavilion Lord behind him, there were still a few major forces. If he offended all of them, even if the Pavilion Lord recovered to his peak, he would not be able to withstand them. Do you know what you're saying? A legendary figure questioned. They were already prepared to attack. In the beginning, they did not want to attack because they were giving face to the Pavilion Lord. They did not want to fall out with him. However, Lin Yu dared to say such words, which infuriated them. They had been invincible for thousands of years and were worshipped by others. Now, someone dared to threaten them in front of their faces. Do you think you could protect these people? Lin Yu said indifferently. His figure disappeared from the spot. Blood spurted out from the arm of the man with a folding fan. Then his arm was chopped off. The legendary figures were all shocked. When they regained their senses, Lin Yu had already returned to his original spot. Worlds in near at hand was a superpower that Lin Yu had comprehended himself. Its speed was unparalleled, and it combined the space-time law with the falsifying heaven of the 8 great void tribes. It had already surpassed the scope of ordinary superpowers. Even those who were one realm higher than him and had reached the peak of the entire ancient nation would not be able to match Lin Yu's speed. The man with the folding fan screamed in pain. The immense pain almost drove him crazy. Moreover, this injury was irreversible. His arm would never recover. It would be broken forever. The eyes of the elder of the man with the folding fan narrowed. Everything happened too quickly. By the time he reacted, Lin Yu had already returned to his original spot. This scene was out of everyone's expectations. None of them had expected that Lin Yu would dare to injure a junior in front of these legendary figures. "Don't tell me you think that no one can do anything to you," said a famous person. Their auras had completely sealed off Lin Yu. Poof! Following that was another blood-curdling scream. The man with the folding fan had lost another arm. Even though the legendary beings had sealed this entire space, they could not stop Lin Yu's footsteps. It was as if there was no one in the world who could restrain him. After all, Lin Yu had mastered the complete space-time Tao law, even if it was difficult to use now. The effect of an 8-step cultivator sealing off space was negligible against Lin Yu. The man with the folding fan was about to faint from the pain. He did not understand why he had been targeted twice. "You still have 15 minutes to consider," Lin Yu said indifferently. There was no longer any emotion in his eyes. He was threatening an 8-step powerhouse. Even Sheng could not help but break out in cold sweat. "Lin Yu, isn't he a little too arrogant?" Sheng felt his mouth go dry. At this moment, the sky was filled with a terrifying power. It was like a raging ocean. However, Lin Yu was unmoved. The legendary figures also realized that they couldn't do anything to Lin Yu at the moment. The Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion nodded slightly and said, as expected of the person prophesied by the Heavenly Secrets. He had no intention of making a move. Instead, he was watching with interest. The elder of the man with the folding fan did not dare to gamble anymore. The scene was extremely oppressive. One could clearly sense the killing intent of an 8-step powerhouse. 200,000 origin stones. A legendary being directly through a storage pouch to Lin Yu. However, I don't know if you'll be alive to spend it later. As he said that, he left with his prodigy. Everyone was shocked. An 8-step powerhouse had actually compromised and handed the origin stones to Lin Yu. Just how terrifying is Lin Yu? Someone saw a clue from it. If the 8-step powerhouse was not worried about the safety of his prodigy, he probably would not have taken a step back and compromised. However, this also served to show how terrifying Lin Yu was. Even an 8-step powerhouse would find it difficult to stop him. He had just entered the 7th step, but he was already invincible. In the end, another person compromised and threw the origin stones into Lin Yu's hands. These legendary beings all felt that Lin Yu had an aura that even they were afraid of. In particular, the power of his divine sense was probably enough to suppress the 5 of them. They did not know where Lin Yu's divine sense came from. In addition, Lin Yu had an unparalleled movement technique. They really could not do anything to Lin Yu. This was the most sullen moment for these great forces. In the end, the elder, the man with the folding fan, took out 200,000 origin stones and finally left. Lin Yu nodded in satisfaction. All the commotion dissipated, and Lin Yu landed on the ground. He nodded at Yu Linglong, who had been hiding in the void, and then came to the side of the pavilion master of the secret pavilion. "Let's go back," Lin Yu said. He handed the 200,000 origin stones to the pavilion master of the secret pavilion. This was the interest of the origin stones that he had borrowed. Now, Lin Yu had 1,000,000 origin stones on him. Even a great force would find it difficult to take out such a large amount of origin stones in a short period of time. In the auction 3 days later, Lin Yu would definitely get what he wanted. "You've made so many enemies. I'm afraid," Sheng said with a worried expression. However, Lin Yu did not care. To him, these forces were not a problem at all. He said half-jokingly, "Don't tell me that the Divine Court doesn't want me anymore after provoking these great forces." He knew that the Divine Court's strength was probably far beyond his imagination. The Divine Court's vision is not limited to the small North Star ancient kingdom. The pavilion master of the secret pavilion said, "Even if all the great forces here join forces to suppress the Divine Court, they won't be afraid at all." The pavilion master of the secret pavilion's words revealed great confidence. Lin Yu remembered that the North Star ancient kingdom was the most powerful country in this region. If the Divine Court did not care, then the origin of the entire Divine Court was probably not that simple. They came from a region outside the North Star ancient kingdom. This was the unknown land that the pavilion master of the secret pavilion had mentioned. This undoubtedly gave Lin Yu a deeper understanding of the Divine Court. The founding emperor of the North Star ancient kingdom was a true 10th step expert. There was no one like him in the past or in the future. His cultivation level was already very high. In the universe, he was already a supreme existence. The inheritance that he left behind was definitely unimaginable. There was no lack of 9th step experts among them. The Divine Court was not afraid. However, in the face of this, Lin Yu was still very calm. They returned to the Bright Moon Hotel. Now, when people saw Lin Yu, they all retreated. They did not dare to approach him easily. In their hearts, Lin Yu had become a jinx after extorting an 8th step expert. Chapter 1442. Lin Yu did not pay much attention to everyone's gazes. At this moment, he walked slowly into his room with the pavilion master of the Heaven's Secret Pavilion. "Lin Yu, weren't you too reckless just now?" Sheng asked. In his opinion, it was simply unbelievable that Lin Yu dared to do this to an 8th step expert. Even though Sheng knew that Lin Yu's strength was terrifying and that he had many trump cards, he was still facing an 8th step expert who had been in that realm for a long time. This was no different from courting death. Lin Yu shook his head gently and did not say anything about Sheng's doubts. Sheng was puzzled. However, he did not say anything in the end. When he first saw Lin Yu, he could not see through him. Now, Lin Yu's performance had deeply shocked him. At this moment, he did not know how many trump cards Lin Yu was hiding to be so fearless. Sheng had probably underestimated Lin Yu. The next morning, Lin Yu sat cross-legged on the bed. He had not slept all night and had been consolidating his realm. Lin Yu didn't say much about Sheng Xing's unwillingness to sleep with others, so he just let him be. "Go and have your breakfast now," Sheng said. The pavilion master of the Heaven's Secret Pavilion had already sent news that they had prepared breakfast. Just as Lin Yu got up, there was a knock on the door outside the room. "Young Master Lin, are you inside?" A melodious voice sounded. "What's the matter?" Lin Yu waved his hand, and the door opened. There was a petite woman in front of him. She looked very cute. She was very timid. She was obviously from the Mingwen nunnery and had grown up to be graceful. "Our saintess has prepared breakfast and invites you to have a chat," the woman said. "Tell your saintess that I appreciate her kindness, but I'm going to eat now." Lin Yu refused directly. The woman revealed a troubled expression. However, after hearing Lin Yu's tactful refusal, he didn't continue to pester him. He directly walked out of the room and said, "Then I won't disturb young Master Lin." Lin Yu sighed softly. However, Sheng teased, "The one who invited you is the holy maiden of Mingyuan Nunnery, a goddess that countless geniuses in the North Star ancient kingdom yearn for. You actually gave up the opportunity to have breakfast with her?" Sheng was a little puzzled. Lin Yu only shook his head slightly. He had no interest in this. "Why don't brother Sheng go instead of me?" Lin Yu said. After hearing this, Sheng directly refused. "I'm not interested in women," Sheng said arrogantly. Lin Yu cautiously took half a step back. Could it be that it was just as he had guessed? Sheng had always been a rabbit, an old glass? He saw Lin Yu take half a step back. Sheng laughed and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm not interested in men either. I'm only focused on Tao." After hearing Sheng's explanation, Lin Yu was slightly relieved. If Sheng was really a rabbit, he definitely wouldn't have given up the opportunity to sleep alone yesterday. The two of them walked out of Mingware Restaurant. Although Mingware Restaurant provided food, the pavilion master of Heaven's Secret Pavilion didn't want to eat here. They came to the most famous restaurant in the area. There were 2 floors and customers were already coming and going. They could see the waiter greeting them enthusiastically. He was even more enthusiastic than the procuress of a brothel. "Sirs, what would you like to eat? Please come in." After seeing Lin Yu and Sheng, the waiter had good eyesight and could tell that Lin Yu and Sheng had an extraordinary aura. The people who came here had extraordinary status and cultivation. There were many people like Lin Yu and Sheng. However, the waiter could tell that they weren't ordinary people from their auras. This sort of person was either an expert or someone with a noble status. Thus, they would definitely be very generous in their spending. "I already have an appointment," Sheng said. "I see. Sirs, please come in." The waiter greeted them enthusiastically. Sheng and Lin Yu entered the restaurant. Obviously, the disturbance from yesterday was not over yet. When Lin Yu arrived, everyone was shocked. I didn't expect that Lin Yu, who offended several major factions, would still dare to show his face. Someone was shocked. However, they didn't dare to look at Lin Yu. Lin Yu was in the limelight. If they accidentally offended him, they would have to drink Meng Po's soup today. Therefore, the few of them only whispered to each other and gathered around the table to discuss. Although this couldn't escape Lin Yu's perception, he didn't care at all. Yesterday, he didn't care about the lives of the few geniuses. Instead, he cared about the large amount of dawnstones he needed. 100,000 dawnstones were enough for a 7-step cultivator to advance by 1 level. Now, Lin Yu had no less than 1,000,000 dawnstones on him. Everyone found it unbelievable that he would casually carry such a large amount of dawnstones with him. Lin Yu came to the counter. Sheng asked. At this time, the shopkeeper who was calculating the accounts was obviously startled when he saw Lin Yu's face. When he heard that Lin Yu and Sheng Zheng were only here to look for the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion, he couldn't help but secretly sigh in relief. "Sir Lin, this way please," the manager said. At this moment, enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. The Heavenly Sword Sect's deacon also arrived, just as he was about to take a seat. Seeing that the manager had already put down the accounts, the deacon eagerly led Lin Yu to the 2nd floor. They brushed past the Heavenly Sword Sect's deacon. This made some people's gazes become strange. This was definitely the Heavenly Sword Sect's deacon's lifelong shadow. However, the most important thing was, now, he was no longer Lin Yu's opponent. When he was defeated, he thought that he was suppressed by the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion, which was why he couldn't unleash his full strength. However, after witnessing yesterday's battle with his own eyes, he clearly realized that in front of Lin Yu, he was afraid that he could barely withstand a few moves. After seeing Lin Yu come to the 2nd floor, the Heavenly Sword Sect's deacon became dispirited. In the end, his interest waned. He brought Xiaoya and left this place. He could only look for another restaurant. When he left, he could still clearly hear the voices of some people discussing. Almost everyone in the city knew that he had been humiliated. In the end, he had no choice but to return to the Bright Moon restaurant. He decided not to come out of seclusion before the auction started. This also prevented him from encountering Lin Yu again and again, which would make him angry. Lin Yu found the location of the pavilion master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion. This was the side by the window. He could see the heavy traffic below. There were cultivators riding powerful, strange beasts. They looked majestic as they walked on the street with their heads held high. Those who were qualified to come to this city within the city were not weak. They were all cultivators. There were also some experts in the 8th step who brought their juniors here to broaden their horizons. Pavilion Master, you're up so early. Shun cupped his fists respectfully. Weren't I waiting for you? The Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion smiled. After the servant went to report, the dishes were quickly served. Although food is no longer as important to the world after stepping onto the path of cultivation, without it, the world would be missing a taste. The Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion took a bite of the dish and said with a smile. Lin Yu and Sheng sighed. They felt that the Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion made a lot of sense. Gentlemen, this is the pear blossom carving from the shop. Please take a look. Almost all the people who came to this city within the city to do business came from extraordinary backgrounds. The shopkeeper had already recognized the identity of the Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion in Lin Yu. At this moment, in order to please the two of them, he deliberately gave them the most precious wine in the shop. Thank you. The Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Secrets Pavilion expressed his gratitude. Please enjoy. The shopkeeper left. However, just as they were talking, everyone's gazes were attracted by a graceful figure. She had short hair and looked very capable. Coupled with her black clothes, she had a different kind of beauty. Her figure was exquisite and almost perfect. He came to the front of Lin Yu's table. The person who came was Yuling Long. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.